Welcome to Sleepless History, the podcast where we explore the gentle, meandering paths of historical events and cultural traditions in a way that's perfect for drifting off to sleep. I'm your host, and tonight we're embarking on a long, slow journey through the winter solstice celebrations of cultures around the world. Get comfortable, close your eyes if you'd like, and let's explore together. The winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, the longest night, that moment when the earth tilts furthest from the sun in the northern hemisphere, usually occurring around December 21st or 22nd. For thousands upon thousands of years, humans have marked this astronomical event, this turning point in the solar year, with ceremonies, festivals, and quiet observations. Tonight, we'll travel across continents and through millennia, examining how different peoples have understood and celebrated this darkest point of the year. We'll move slowly, deliberately, through ancient stone circles and modern festivals, through myths and rituals, through the simple act of lighting a candle against the darkness. Let's begin our journey in the ancient world, where the solstice was not just an astronomical curiosity, but a matter of survival and cosmic significance. Part 1. Ancient Observances and Stone Monuments. In the depths of prehistory, long before written language, before cities, before agriculture as we know it, humans watched the sky. They noticed patterns. The sun rose in different places along the horizon throughout the year. The days grew shorter, then longer. The moon cycled through its phases, and at the darkest point of the year, something remarkable happened. The sun began its return. Imagine being an early human, living in a world without electric lights, without the certainty of stored food lasting through winter, without weather forecasts or calendars. The shortening days must have been profound. Would the sun continue to weaken? Would warmth ever return? The winter solstice marked the answer. Yes, the sun would come back, the days would lengthen, spring would return. One of the most famous prehistoric monuments aligned with the winter solstice stands in Ireland, Newgrange. This passage tomb was built around 3200 BCE, making it older than Stonehenge, older than the Egyptian pyramids. 5,000 years ago, Neolithic people moved massive stones, hundreds of them, some weighing tons, to construct this monument. The entrance to Newgrange faces southeast, and above the doorway is a special opening called a roof box. For most of the year, the interior chamber remains in darkness. But for a few days around the winter solstice, at dawn, something magical happens. The rising sun's rays shine through the roof box and illuminate a long passage, 62 feet into the tomb, lighting up the inner chamber for approximately 17 minutes. Archaeologists believe this alignment was intentional, a deliberate feat of engineering and astronomical observation. The people who built Newgrange understood the solar cycle well enough to create this effect. They wanted to mark this moment, this turning point, with light penetrating darkness. What ceremonies took place there, we can only imagine. Perhaps the community gathered at dawn, waiting in the cold December air for that shaft of golden light to appear. Perhaps it was a private ritual, witnessed only by priests or elders. Perhaps they brought offerings, spoke prayers, or simply stood in silent acknowledgement of the sun's return. The construction of Newgrange would have taken decades, possibly generations. Workers quarried white quartz stones and rolled boulders of granite, transporting them from miles away. They placed each stone with precision, calculating angles and alignments without modern tools. This was not a casual project. The winter solstice mattered deeply to these people. Across the Irish Sea in England stands perhaps the most famous prehistoric monument in the world, Stonehenge. While many people associate Stonehenge with the summer solstice, when crowds gather to watch the sunrise, the monument's primary alignment may actually be with the winter solstice sunset. Stonehenge was built in several stages, beginning around 3000 BCE and continuing for over 1500 years. The sarsen stones, those massive upright stones forming the iconic outer circle, were erected around 2500 BCE. Each stone weighs about 25 tons. They were transported from quarries roughly 20 miles away, then shaped, lifted, and positioned with remarkable precision. On the winter solstice, the sun sets in alignment with the central corridor of Stonehenge. If you stand in the centre and look through the stones toward the southwest, the setting sun frames itself perfectly within the monument's architecture. Some archaeologists suggest this was the primary alignment, more important to the builders than the summer solstice sunrise. Recent excavations near Stonehenge have uncovered evidence of massive feasting around the winter solstice. Animal bones, particularly of pigs, show that thousands of people gathered here during midwinter. Chemical analysis of pig teeth suggests these animals were raised in various parts of Britain and brought to Stonehenge for slaughter and feasting. This was a gathering place, a ceremonial centre where communities came together in the darkest season. The feasting evidence is important. It suggests that for the people of Neolithic Britain, the winter solstice was not a sombre, fearful time, but a moment of celebration and community. Despite the cold, despite the scarcity of the season, people travelled long distances to feast, to gather, to mark the sun's turning. In Scotland, the stone circle of Maeshowe, built around 2800 BCE, shows another winter solstice alignment. This chambered cairn on the Orkney Islands features a passage that aligns with the setting sun on the winter solstice. For several weeks around the solstice, the setting sun shines down the passage and illuminates the back wall of the chamber. The Orkney Islands are far north, at about 59 degrees latitude. In midwinter, daylight lasts only about 6 hours. The long darkness must have been overwhelming. Yet the people here built monuments to capture those precious rays of solstice sunlight, to hold them somehow, to mark the moment when the sun began its return journey. These monuments, Newgrange, Stonehenge, Maeshowe, and dozens of others scattered across Europe, tell us something fundamental about our ancestors. They tell us that the winter solstice was important enough to invest enormous resources in marking it. They tell us that astronomical observation was sophisticated and precise. They tell us that the return of the light was worth celebrating. Let's move forward in time to the classical world, where the winter solstice took on new meanings and new names. Part 2. Roman Saturnalia and the dies Natalis Solis Invicti. In ancient Rome, the period around the winter solstice was marked by one of the most beloved festivals of the Roman year, Saturnalia. This was a time when normal social order was temporarily suspended, when masters might serve their slaves, when gambling was permitted, when gifts were exchanged, and when the city erupted in celebration. Saturnalia honoured Saturn, the god of agriculture, wealth, and time. Saturn was one of the oldest Roman gods, associated with a golden age when humans lived in peace and plenty. During Saturnalia, Romans attempted to recreate that golden age, if only for a few days. The festival originally lasted one day, December 17th, but by the late Republic and early Empire, it had expanded to a week-long celebration running from December 17th through December 23. Some sources suggest it sometimes lasted even longer, continuing through the winter solstice itself. The festival began with a sacrifice at the Temple of Saturn in the Roman Forum. This temple housed a statue of Saturn whose feet were normally bound with woolen chains. During Saturnalia, the chains were removed, symbolizing Saturn's liberation and the temporary freedom from normal constraints that characterized the festival. After the sacrifice, there was a public banquet, a lectisternium, where statues of the gods were placed on couches and offered food as if they were honoured guests. Then the Romans went home to private celebrations. During Saturnalia, people decorated their homes with greenery, laurel branches, holly, ivy. They lit candles and lamps, filling their homes with light during the darkest days of the year. The connection to light and darkness, to the turning of the year, was implicit in these celebrations, even if not always explicitly stated. One of the most distinctive features of Saturnalia was the reversal of social roles. Slaves might be served meals by their masters. They were permitted to speak freely, even to insult their masters without punishment. Gambling, normally restricted, was allowed for everyone, slave and free alike. People wore informal clothing, the synthesis, instead of the formal toga. A king of Saturnalia was chosen, often by lot, who would give absurd commands that others had to follow. These reversals were temporary, of course. They didn't overthrow the social order, rather, they reinforced it by creating a brief, sanctioned period of disorder that ultimately reminded everyone of the normal hierarchical structure. But for a few days, the world was turned upside down. Gift-giving was central to Saturnalia. People exchanged sigillaria, small figurines made of clay or wax, and cerae, candles. The gifts were generally modest. The point was the exchange itself, the gesture of goodwill, not the value of the item. Wealthier patrons might give more substantial gifts to their clients, but the practice was universal across social classes. The Roman poet Catullus, writing in the 1st century BCE, called Saturnalia the best of days. The poet Martial composed short verses to accompany gifts, many of them humorous or slightly bawdy. His writings give us a vivid picture of Saturnalia, the noise, the celebration, the abundance of food and wine, the playful atmosphere. As Rome expanded and absorbed new territories and peoples, Saturnalia evolved and interacted with other winter solstice traditions. In the later empire, particularly in the 3rd and 4th century CE, another winter solstice celebration gained prominence, the Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the unconquered Sunday. This festival, celebrated on December 25th, honoured Sol Invictus, the unconquered Sunday. The cult of Sol Invictus became increasingly important in the later Roman Empire. Emperor Aurelian, who reigned from 270 to 275 CE, officially established the cult and built a temple to Sol Invictus in Rome. December 25th was chosen because it fell near the winter solstice, the moment when the sun, having reached its weakest point, begins to grow stronger again. The sun is reborn, unconquered by the darkness. The symbolism was powerful. Just as the sun returns from its lowest point, so too would Rome recover from its troubles. The celebration of Sol Invictus included chariot races in the Circus Maximus. These races were wildly popular, drawing enormous crowds. The winning charioteer received palms and crowns, symbols of victory. Priests of Sol Invictus performed sacrifices and rituals, calling for the sun's protection and blessing on the empire. The cult of Sol Invictus represented a kind of solar monotheism, or at least solar henotheism, the worship of one supreme solar deity while not denying the existence of other gods. Several Roman emperors associated themselves with Sol Invictus, appearing on coins with solar crowns or being depicted as the sun god's representative on earth. The dies Natalis, Solis, Invicti, and Saturnalia coexisted in the Roman calendar, both marking the general period of the winter solstice with celebration, light, and hope for renewal. When Christianity became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire in the 4th century, these festivals would be transformed, but many of their elements, the gift-giving, the greenery, the feasting, the focus on light in darkness, would persist in new forms. But let's not jump ahead. Before we discuss the Christianization of winter solstice celebrations, let's travel to other parts of the ancient world to see how different cultures marked this cosmic turning point. Part 3. Winter solstice in ancient Persia and the celebration of Yalda. Far to the east of Rome, in ancient Persia, the winter solstice was marked by a celebration called Shabe Yalda, or simply Yalda Night. This tradition, which continues in Iran and among Persian communities worldwide to this day, dates back thousands of years to ancient Zoroastrian practices. The word Yalda comes from a Syriac word meaning birth, and it refers to the birth or rebirth of the sun. In the Zoroastrian worldview, the cosmos was a battleground between light and darkness, between good and evil, between the divine forces of Ahura Mazda and the destructive forces of Angra Mainyu. The winter solstice represented the moment of greatest darkness, the longest night, but also the turning point when light begins to triumph. On Yalda night, families gathered together to stay awake through the long darkness, keeping watch until dawn. This was not a fearful vigil, but a celebration. They would eat, tell stories, recite poetry, and wait for the sunrise that confirmed the victory of light over darkness. Certain foods became traditional for Yalda night. Pomegranates, with their jewel-like seeds, symbolized the cycle of life and the hope of spring. Watermelons, preserved from summer, represented the warm season and served as a reminder that winter would pass. Nuts and dried fruits were shared. These foods had practical origins. They were what was available in winter, but they took on symbolic meanings. Reading poetry was central to Yalda night celebrations, particularly the works of the great Persian poet Hafez. The Divan of Hafez, a collection of his ghazals, was often used for bibliomancy, a form of divination. Someone would make a wish, close their eyes, and open Hafez's collected works to a random page. The poem on that page was believed to provide insight or answer questions about the coming year. Elders told stories through the long night. Some were religious tales from Zoroastrian tradition. Others were historical, recounting the great kings of Persia. Still others were folk tales, passed down through generations, tales of heroes and clever peasants, of divs and peris, of love and loss and triumph. The Zoroastrian calendar divided the year into periods associated with different spiritual principles. The winter months were associated with gathering together, with introspection, with maintaining bonds of community and family. Yalda night was the culmination of this emphasis on togetherness, the entire family, sometimes multiple generations, staying awake together through the longest night. In the ancient Zoroastrian texts, there are references to the spiritual significance of the winter solstice. The darkness was associated with Ahriman, the destructive spirit, but the solstice marked the point where his power would begin to wane. The sun, associated with Ahura Mazda's divine light and truth, would grow stronger from this point forward. Thus Yalda night was a celebration of the ultimate triumph of good over evil, light over darkness. After the Islamic conquest of Persia in the 7th century CE, Zoroastrianism declined dramatically, but many of its festivals and traditions persisted, adapted into new cultural contexts. Yalda night survived, shedding its specifically Zoroastrian religious content, but retaining its essential character, a family gathering, a celebration of light, a vigil through the longest night, and a reaffirmation of community bonds. The tradition of reading Hafez is particularly interesting because Hafez lived in the 14th century CE, nearly 1,000 years after Zoroastrianism ceased to be Persia's dominant religion. Yet his poetry became central to Yalda night celebrations. This shows how traditions evolve, how they incorporate new elements while maintaining continuity with the past. Today, Iranians both inside Iran and in the global diaspora continue to celebrate Yalda night. The foods remain largely the same. Families still gather, Hafez is still read. The longest night is still marked with togetherness and hope for the returning light. A tradition that began among ancient Zoroastrians, adapting to the harsh winters of the Iranian plateau, continues in apartments in Tehran, in houses in Los Angeles, in communities wherever Iranians have settled. The continuity of Yalda night over thousands of years tells us something important about winter solstice celebrations. While the specific religious meanings might change, while empires rise and fall, while religions spread and recede, the fundamental human response to the darkest night remains. We gather together, we share food, we tell stories, we create light, and we wait for the dawn. Part 4. East Asian Winter Solstice Traditions. Let's travel eastward now to China, where the winter solstice has been observed and celebrated for at least 2,500 years. The Chinese name for the winter solstice is Dongzhi, which literally means arrival of winter or extreme of winter. In ancient China, the winter solstice was one of the most important dates in the calendar, sometimes considered even more important than the Lunar New Year. The Zhou dynasty, which began around 1046 BCE, included winter solstice observations in its ritual calendar. Emperors would perform ceremonies to heaven on the winter solstice, acknowledging the cosmic order and their role as the son of heaven, the intermediary between the celestial and earthly realms. These imperial ceremonies were elaborate affairs. The emperor would fast and purify himself for several days before the solstice. On the day itself, dressed in ceremonial robes, he would proceed to the Temple of Heaven, often accompanied by a procession of officials, musicians, and attendants. At the temple, he would perform the winter solstice sacrifice, offering wine, silk, jade, and animals to heaven, asking for blessings on the empire and affirming the proper order of the cosmos. The Temple of Heaven in Beijing, built in the early 15th century CE during the Ming dynasty, is perhaps the most famous site of these winter solstice ceremonies. The complex includes the Hall of Prayer for Good Harvests and the circular mound altar where emperors performed the winter sacrifice. The architecture is rich with symbolism. The round shapes representing heaven, the square bases representing earth, the numbers of stones and steps all carefully calculated according to cosmic principles. But Dongzhi was not just an imperial affair. Throughout Chinese society, families marked the winter solstice with specific customs and foods. In northern China, it's traditional to eat dumplings on Dongzhi. There's a story that connects this to the famous physician Jiang Zhongjing, who lived during the Han Dynasty around the 2nd century CE. According to legend, Jiang saw poor people suffering from frostbite on their ears during a harsh winter. He created a medicine wrapped in dough and shaped like ears, boiled them, and distributed them to the people. This medicinal food, the story goes, became the origin of dumplings eaten on Dongzhi to ward off the cold. In southern China, particularly in the regions around the Yangtze River and southward, the traditional Dongzhi food is tang yuan, glutinous rice balls usually served in sweet soup. These round balls symbolize reunion and completeness. Families gather to eat tang yuan together, emphasizing family unity and togetherness. The color of tang yuan carries meaning too. Red tang yuan symbolizes good fortune and happiness. White tang yuan represents purity. Pink tang yuan suggests auspiciousness and celebration. The act of making tang yuan together, family members sitting around a table rolling the glutinous rice into perfect spheres, is as important as eating them. In ancient Chinese philosophy, the winter solstice represented a crucial moment in the cycle of yin and yang. Winter was the time of maximum yin darkness, cold, stillness, the feminine principle. But at the solstice, yang began its return. The days would lengthen, warmth would slowly return, activity would increase. This was not just meteorological observation, but cosmic principle. The universe moved through cycles of yin and yang, and human life should align with these cosmic patterns. The I Ching, the ancient Chinese divination text, contains references to this cosmic cycling. Hexagram 24, Fu, meaning return, is associated with the winter solstice. It shows one yang line rising beneath 5 yin lines, representing the first returning movement of yang energy after its complete absence. The image is of thunder within the earth, of the stirring of new life beneath the frozen surface. Traditional Chinese medicine understood the winter solstice as a pivotal time for health. Winter was a time for rest, conservation of energy, nourishment of the body's deepest resources. The kidneys, associated with water and winter in the 5-element system, were particularly important to nurture during this season. Certain foods, black beans, black sesame seeds, walnuts, were considered especially beneficial to eat around the winter solstice. The winter solstice also marked a counting system that helped farmers and ordinary people track the progression from deep winter toward spring. The system divided the period after the winter solstice into 9 periods of 9 days each, a total of 81 days. Each 9-day period had characteristics described in folk verses. By the end of the 9th period, spring would have arrived, and willows would begin to sprout. This counting of nines gave people a framework for understanding winter. Each 9-day period brought them closer to spring. There were folk songs associated with each period, describing the weather and appropriate activities. It was a way of making the long winter comprehensible and bearable, marking time until the return of warmth. In Korea, the winter solstice tradition shares many similarities with Chinese practices, which makes sense given the historical cultural exchanges between the two regions. The Korean name for the winter solstice is Dongzhi, essentially the same pronunciation as the Chinese Dongzhi. Like in China, Dongzhi was traditionally considered a small new year. One distinctive Korean tradition for Dongzhi involves eating Patjuk, a red bean porridge. This porridge has a practical origin. Red beans are nutritious and store well through winter, but it took on ritual significance. The red colour was believed to ward off evil spirits, and families would place bowls of Patjuk in various places around the house and property to provide protection. Some families would even splash the porridge on the walls and gates, creating red marks that would keep malevolent forces away. The red bean porridge also contains small rice dumplings. Traditionally, each family member would eat as many dumplings as their age, a practice that reinforced family bonds and marked another year of life survived. In Japan, the winter solstice is called Toji. Like their neighbours, Japanese people traditionally ate special foods on this day, though the specific dishes varied by region. In many parts of Japan, people eat kabocha, a type of winter squash, on Toji. The bright orange colour is associated with the sun and with health. There's also a tradition of eating foods whose names contain the sound N or are written with the character 4N, as these are believed to bring good luck. Another Japanese Toji tradition involves taking a yuzu bath. Yuzu is a citrus fruit with an intense fragrance. On the winter solstice, whole yuzu fruits, or sometimes just the peel, are added to bathwater. The hot bath with yuzu is believed to prevent colds and warm the body against winter's chill. The practice probably has practical benefits. The hot water and citrus oils are indeed relaxing and stimulating for circulation, but it's also a ritual act, a deliberate marking of the solstice. The emphasis throughout East Asian winter solstice traditions is on family, on eating together, on marking the cosmic turning point with togetherness and specific foods. There's less emphasis on public festivals or religious ceremonies, though these existed at the imperial and temple levels, and more emphasis on domestic observance. The winter solstice was, and in many places still is, a time to go home, to be with family, to eat together, and to acknowledge the changing season. Part 5. Germanic and Norse winter celebrations. Let's journey now to Northern Europe, to the lands of Germanic and Norse peoples, where the winter solstice period was marked by celebrations that would eventually evolve into many modern Christmas traditions. In Old Norse, the winter solstice period was called Yule, or Yule in English. This was a multi-day festival that marked the midpoint of winter and celebrated the promise of returning light. The exact timing and duration of Yule varied, but it generally occurred around the winter solstice and could last anywhere from 3 days to 2 weeks. Our knowledge of pre-Christian Norse Yule celebrations is fragmentary, pieced together from later written sources like the sagas and Eddas, from archaeological evidence, and from folkloric traditions that persisted after Christianization. we must be careful not to make overconfident claims about specific practices, but we can paint a general picture. Yule was a time of feasting and sacrifice. Animals, particularly boars and horses, were slaughtered both for food and as offerings to the gods. The Old Norse term for these sacrifices was blot. Archaeological sites in Scandinavia have revealed remains of large feasts dating to the winter solstice period, with evidence of ritual killings and ceremonial deposits. The Norse gods most associated with Yule were Odin and Frey. Odin, the All-Father, was a complex deity associated with wisdom, war, death, and magic. During Yule, there were beliefs about Odin leading a wild hunt across the sky, a procession of spirits and the dead. People left offerings of food for Odin's 8-legged horse, Sleipnir. This tradition of leaving food for supernatural visitors during midwinter would persist in various forms throughout Germanic Europe. Frey was a god of fertility, prosperity, and peace. He was associated with sunshine and fair weather, with bountiful harvests, with male virility, and the hope of fruitful marriages. A boar was particularly sacred to Freya, and boar sacrifices during Yule honoured him and called for his blessings on the coming year. There's a fascinating reference in the Havamal, a collection of Old Norse poems, to a practice called drinking Yule. This involved ceremonial drinking from horns with toasts offered to the gods, to dead ancestors, to living lords and friends. Each toast had significance, and the drinking continued throughout the Yule feast. This wasn't mere drunkenness, though alcohol was certainly involved, but ritual drinking that bound the community together and connected the living with the divine and the ancestral. The evergreen tree, which would become so central to later Christmas celebrations, already had significance in pre-Christian, Germanic, and Norse culture. Evergreens symbolized life persisting through winter, the promise that green would return. Holly, ivy, pine, fir all remained green when other plants died back or lost their leaves. Bringing evergreens inside during Yule was both practical, providing some cheer and fresh scent in the midst of winter, and symbolic, reminding inhabitants that life continued and would flourish again. The Yule log tradition also has roots in pre-Christian Germanic practice. A large log, often oak or ash, was selected, brought into the hall, and burned throughout the Yule celebration. The fire represented the sun, warmth, life, all things that stood against winter darkness. The log might burn for the entire duration of Yule, and a piece of it would be saved to kindle the next year's Yule fire, creating continuity from year to year. Gift-giving was part of Yule celebrations. Lords gave gifts to their followers and servants, reinforcing bonds of loyalty and reciprocity. These gifts might be rings, weapons, valuable cloth, or other items. The giving was public and ceremonial, emphasizing the giver's generosity and the recipient's worthiness. In the Kingdom of Norway, King Hakon the Good, who ruled in the mid-10th century CE after his conversion to Christianity, attempted to align the timing of Yule with Christmas. According to the saga accounts, he decreed that Yule should be celebrated at the same time as Christians celebrated Christ's birth, essentially merging the two festivals. This is one of the earliest documented examples of the deliberate syncretism between pre-Christian winter solstice celebrations and Christmas. Among the Anglo-Saxons in England, before Christianization, there was a similar midwinter festival. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and other sources refer to Modrinicht, or Mother's Night, celebrated on what we would call December 24th. The details are scarce, but it seems to have been a celebration honouring female ancestral spirits or goddesses. The Anglo-Saxon month that included the winter solstice was called Era Giola, before Yule, and the following month was Eftera Giola, after Yule, showing how central this festival was to their calendar. The winter solstice period was when the year turned, when one cycle ended and another began. When Christianity spread through Germanic lands, it encountered these deeply rooted winter celebrations. Rather than attempting to eliminate them entirely, the Church often adapted them, Christianizing their meanings while retaining their forms. Yule feasting became Christmas feasting. Offerings to Odin became offerings to the poor in Christ's name. The evergreen symbolism shifted from life persisting through winter to eternal life through Christ. The Yule log continued, but its meaning was reinterpreted. This process wasn't always smooth or complete. In rural areas and among common people, older beliefs and practices persisted alongside Christian ones, creating a blended folk Christianity that contained elements of both traditions. Folklore collected in Scandinavia in the 19th and 20th centuries revealed beliefs about supernatural beings active during Christmas time, about the need for protective measures during the darkest nights, about spirits of the dead returning, all echoes of pre-Christian beliefs that Christianity had not fully displaced. The Norse influence extended wherever Vikings and their descendants settled. In Iceland, where Norse culture remained particularly strong, Yule traditions were meticulously preserved. In the Faroe Islands, in the Orkney and Shetland Islands, in parts of Scotland and Ireland, in Normandy, in England, wherever Norse people settled, they brought their Yule celebrations, which blended with local traditions to create regional variants. Even today, many Christmas traditions in Northern Europe and in cultures descended from Northern European peoples can be traced back to these pre-Christian Yule celebrations. The Christmas tree, the Yule log, the emphasis on feasting and gift-giving, the gathering of family, the association with evergreens and holly all have roots in ancient Germanic and Norse winter solstice practices. Part 6. Celtic winter traditions and the modern wheel of the year. Among the Celtic peoples of Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Brittany, and other regions, the winter solstice fits into a broader framework of seasonal celebrations. While we must be cautious about claims of ancient Celtic practices, as much of what we think we know comes from relatively late sources, we can discuss both historical practices and modern Celtic-inspired traditions. The ancient Celts, as far as we can determine, did not mark the solstices and equinoxes as their primary festivals. Instead, the major Celtic festivals were the cross-quarter days, falling roughly midway between solstices and equinoxes. These were Samhain in early November, Imbolc in early February, Beltane in early May, and Lugnasad in early August. These festivals marked agricultural and pastoral transitions, the end of harvest and beginning of winter, the first signs of spring, the beginning of summer, and the start of harvest. However, this doesn't mean the winter solstice went unnoticed. The presence of passage tombs like Newgrange, aligned with the winter solstice sunrise, tells us that ancient peoples in Ireland were very aware of the solstice and considered it significant enough to build massive monuments marking it. but this was thousands of years before the Celtic peoples we know from the Iron Age. By the time of the historical Celtic peoples, the winter solstice fell between Samhain and Imbolc in the dark depths of winter. While it may not have been a major festival in itself, it was certainly recognised as the year's turning point, the moment when the sun began its return. In Welsh tradition, there's a reference to the rebirth of the divine child Mabon at the winter solstice. Mabon, whose name means son or young man, appears in Welsh mythology as a divine youth. The theme of a divine child born at the winter solstice, bringing the return of light, appears in various mythologies, and it's possible this was part of Celtic belief, though much of what we know about Mabon comes from later sources that may have been influenced by Christian ideas. Modern Celtic neo-paganism and Wicca have created a system called the Wheel of the Year, which includes 8 festivals, the 4 Celtic cross-quarter days, plus the 2 solstices and 2 equinoxes. In this system, the winter solstice is called Yule, borrowing the Germanic name. This modern 8-fold cycle is not ancient, but rather a 20th century creation drawing on various historical sources and modern spiritual ideas. However, it's become influential and represents how many contemporary pagans and neo-pagans understand and celebrate the seasons. In the modern Wheel of the Year, Yule marks the rebirth of the sun. The longest night gives way to dawn, and from this point the days lengthen. It's a time of celebration, of hope, of welcoming the returning light. Modern practitioners often perform rituals at dawn on the solstice, witnessing the sunrise after the longest night. They might light candles, exchange gifts, decorate with evergreens, share feasts, many of the same practices found in various winter solstice traditions. In Scottish tradition, there was a winter solstice custom involving the burning of juniper. Households would burn juniper branches, carrying the smoking branches through the house and around the property. The smoke was believed to purify the space and ward off malevolent spirits. This practice, called seining, was particularly important at New Year, but was also sometimes performed at the winter solstice. In Ireland, there's a folk tradition of leaving a candle in the window on Christmas Eve, which falls close to the winter solstice. While the Christian explanation is that the candle lights the way for Mary and Joseph seeking shelter, there may be older traditions involved of lighting the way for travellers or spirits during the darkest time of year. The Celtic emphasis on the thin places, the liminal times and spaces where the ordinary world and the other world come close together, extended to the winter solstice. The long night was a threshold time, a time when normal rules might not apply, when care must be taken because the boundaries between worlds were permeable. One interesting aspect of Celtic-influenced winter traditions is the concept of the Oak King and the Holly King, representing the waxing and waning year. According to this symbolic framework, which may have ancient roots, but is primarily known from modern sources, the Oak King rules from the winter solstice to the summer solstice, representing the growing light and warmth. The Holly King rules from summer solstice to winter solstice, representing the waning light. At each solstice, the king's battle and rulership passes from one to the other. This mythic cycle provides a narrative framework for understanding the solar year and the changing seasons. Whether or not ancient Celts actually believed in the Oak King and Holly King in these exact terms is debatable, But the symbolic framework captures something real about the solar year and provides a rich mythological language for understanding seasonal change. Part 7. The Christianization of winter solstice and the development of Christmas. Now we arrive at a pivotal moment in the history of winter solstice celebrations, the emergence and spread of Christianity and its complex relationship with existing winter festivals. Christianity began as a small Jewish sect in the Roman province of Judea in the 1st century CE. For its first several centuries, Christians did not celebrate Christ's birth at all. The early church was more focused on Christ's death and resurrection, commemorated at Easter. The date of Jesus' birth was unknown, and the Gospels provide no clear indication of when it occurred. In fact, some early Christian writers explicitly argued against celebrating birthdays at all, seeing it as a pagan practice. The church father Origen, writing in the 3rd century CE, stated that only sinners celebrated birthdays, saints, and righteous people did not mark such occasions. But as Christianity grew and spread throughout the Roman Empire, the question of commemorating Christ's birth became more pressing. Different regions proposed different dates. Some suggested March 25th, others April, still others May or November. In the Eastern churches, January 6th became popular, associated with both the birth and the baptism of Jesus. The date of December 25th appears in Roman records in the mid-4th century CE. In 336 CE, a Roman calendar lists December 25th as the date of Christ's birth. By 350 CE, Pope Julius I officially declared December 25th as the date for celebrating Christmas. Why December 25th? The proximity to the winter solstice is not coincidental. Several factors likely influence this choice. First, there was a theological calculation. Some early Christians believed that Jesus was conceived on the same date he died. Since the crucifixion was believed to have occurred on March 25th, his conception would also be March 25th. 9 months from March 25th brings us to December 25th for his birth. Second, and perhaps more significantly, December 25th was already a festival day in Rome, the Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the unconquered Sunday. By placing Christ's birth on this date, the Church was making a powerful theological statement. Christ was the true unconquered Sun, the light of the world. The sun god worshipped by pagans was merely a foreshadowing, a dim reflection of the true divine light. This was a deliberate strategy. Rather than trying to eliminate popular festivals, the Church transformed them, giving them new Christian meanings, while retaining their basic structure and timing. People were already accustomed to celebrating in late December. They already associated this time with feasting, gift-giving, greenery, and light. The Church channeled these existing practices toward Christian purposes. The process was gradual and varied by region. In some places, Christmas was quickly adopted and enthusiastically celebrated. In others, older traditions persisted for centuries alongside the new Christian festival. In rural areas, pre-Christian beliefs and practices proved particularly resilient. Early Christmas celebrations borrowed heavily from Saturnalia and other Roman winter festivals. Gift-giving continued, though now framed as honouring the gifts of the Magi to the infant Jesus. Feasting continued, though now it celebrated Christ's birth rather than Saturn's golden age. evergreen decorations continued, though now they symbolized eternal life through Christ, rather than the persistence of nature through winter. The Church also had to contend with the Dies Natalis Solis Invicti directly. Various Church Fathers wrote sermons explicitly addressing the connection between the sun and Christ. They didn't deny the connection, but reinterpreted it. Yes, they said, we celebrate on the birthday of the sun, but Christ is the true Sun of righteousness, mentioned in the prophet Malachi. Christ brings true light to the world, not mere physical light, but spiritual illumination. As Christianity spread beyond the Roman Empire into northern Europe, it encountered the Germanic and Norse Yule celebrations we discussed earlier. Again, the Church employed a strategy of adaptation rather than elimination. The British monk Bede, writing in the 8th century CE, explicitly described this strategy. He noted that missionaries were instructed not to destroy pagan temples, but to convert them into churches, not to eliminate pagan festivals, but to Christianize them. This approach had practical wisdom. People are deeply attached to their festivals and traditions. Attempting to eliminate them entirely would create resistance and resentment. But transforming them, giving them new meanings while retaining their familiar forms, allowed for a smoother transition. The date of Christmas itself remained somewhat fluid for centuries. In some places, the 12 days between December 25th and January 6th were all considered part of the Christmas season. Different regions emphasized different days within this period. The feast of Saint Stephen on December 26th, Holy Innocents on December 28th, the circumcision on January 1st, Epiphany on January 6th, all became part of the extended Christmas celebration. In the Eastern Orthodox churches, which followed a different calculation, Christmas was celebrated on January 7th, according to the Julian calendar. This difference persists to the present day in some Orthodox communities. The medieval Christmas period became a time of elaborate celebration, particularly in the halls of nobility and royalty. The feasting could last for weeks. There were plays and pageants, music and dancing, games and competitions. The Lord of Misrule, or Abbot of Unreason, echoing the Roman king of Saturnalia, presided over festivities where normal social hierarchies were temporarily suspended. One medieval Christmas tradition was the Feast of Fools, celebrated particularly in France. On or near January 1st, lower clergy would elect a mock pope or bishop. Church services would be conducted in a deliberately absurd manner, and general mayhem would ensue. This practice, though repeatedly condemned by church authorities, persisted in some places into the 16th century. It represented a continuation of the Saturnalian principle of temporary social inversion. The Christmas season also became associated with charity. Lords were expected to be generous to their dependents. The wealthy distributed alms to the poor. This practice had both Christian theological roots, Christ's teaching about helping the needy, and echoes of older traditions of midwinter generosity, when those with stored food and resources shared with those who had less. Caroling developed as a Christmas tradition. Originally, carols were not specifically religious songs, but general festive songs associated with dancing. Over time, the carol became more specifically associated with Christmas and more specifically Christian in content. Groups would go from house to house singing, often receiving food, drink, or money in return. The Protestant Reformation of the 16th century had complex effects on Christmas celebrations. Some Protestant reformers, particularly the more radical ones, viewed Christmas with suspicion. It was not commanded in the Bible, they argued, and its pagan origins were obvious. The Puritans in England, and later in New England, attempted to suppress Christmas celebrations entirely. In 1647, the Puritangent-controlled English Parliament passed a law abolishing Christmas as a holy day. People were expected to work on December 25th. Shops were to remain open. Celebrations were forbidden. This law was deeply unpopular and was widely ignored. There were even riots in some cities when authorities tried to enforce it. When the monarchy was restored in 1660, Christmas celebrations resumed. In Puritan New England, Christmas was also banned. The Massachusetts Bay Colony prohibited any observance of Christmas, imposing fines on anyone who took the day off work or engaged in festivities. This ban remained in effect until the late 17th century. Even after it was lifted, Christmas remained a regular workday in much of New England well into the 19th century. But in other parts of the Christian world, Christmas continued to be celebrated with enthusiasm. Catholic countries maintained elaborate Christmas traditions. The Orthodox churches had their own rich Christmas customs. And even in Protestant regions, where official celebration was discouraged, many people quietly maintained their traditional practices. The Victorian era, the 19th century, saw a revival and transformation of Christmas in England and America. This is when many of our modern Christmas traditions crystallized into their current forms. But that's a story that takes us beyond the ancient and medieval worlds into the realm of relatively recent history. The key point for our purposes is that Christmas, as it developed over centuries, absorbed and transformed winter solstice celebrations from multiple cultures. The Roman Saturnalia, the dies Natalis, Solis, Invicti, Germanic Yule, Celtic practices all contributed elements that were Christianized and incorporated into the complex phenomenon we call Christmas. And even in our modern, largely secularized celebration of Christmas, echoes of these ancient winter solstice traditions persist. When we decorate with evergreens, when we exchange gifts, when we feast with family, when we light candles against the winter darkness, we are participating in traditions that stretch back thousands of years, back before Christianity, back to the earliest humans who watched the sun reach its lowest point and celebrated its inevitable return. Part 8. Indigenous Peoples of the Americas and Winter Solstice. Let's cross the Atlantic now and the Pacific to the Americas, where indigenous peoples developed their own rich traditions around the winter solstice, independent of European and Asian influences. The diversity of indigenous American cultures is vast. From the Arctic to Tierra del Fuego, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, hundreds of distinct peoples with different languages, belief systems, and practices inhabited the Americas. Each had their own relationship with the solar cycle and their own ways of marking the winter solstice. We can only touch on a few examples, but they give us a sense of how widespread and varied these traditions were. In the American Southwest, the Puebloan peoples, including the Hopi, Zuni, and others, have maintained winter solstice ceremonies that continue to the present day. These ceremonies are often deeply sacred, and some aspects are not shared with outsiders, but we can discuss the general outlines. For the Hopi people, the winter solstice is marked by the Soyal ceremony. This is one of the most important ceremonies in the Hopi ritual calendar. It typically lasts for 16 days. beginning 8 days before the solstice and extending 8 days after. Soyal is a ceremony of purification and renewal. It marks the beginning of the Kachina season, the time when the Kachina's spiritual beings who serve as messengers between humans and the divine return to the Hopi mesas. The ceremony involves prayer sticks, called pahos, which are carefully crafted and blessed, then placed at sacred locations as offerings. One of the central purposes of Soyal is to symbolically turn the sun back on its path. The Hopi understand that the sun has travelled to its winter house, its southernmost point. The ceremony helps convince the sun to return northward, bringing longer days and eventually the warmth needed for crops. The Hopi concept of the sun's journey is sophisticated. They observe that the sun rises and sets at different points on the horizon throughout the year. At the winter solstice, it reaches its southernmost point. The Soyal ceremony involves elaborate ritual preparations to ensure the sun will indeed turn back northward. During Soyal, there are kiva ceremonies, gatherings in the underground ceremonial chambers that are central to Puebloan religious life. These ceremonies involve prayers, songs, dances, and the preparation of ritual objects. The specific details are held sacred and not publicly shared, which we should respect. What we can say is that the ceremony involves the entire community in acknowledging the solar cycle and praying for the well-being of all people. Among the Zuni people, the winter solstice ceremony is called Shalako. Like Soyal, Shalako is a complex, multi-day ceremony involving the entire community. Kachinas visit the pueblo and elaborately costumed dancers perform throughout the night. New houses are blessed. Prayers are offered for rain, for fertile fields, for the health and prosperity of the people. The Shalako ceremony involves enormous preparation. The costumes alone are major undertakings. Some stand over 10 feet tall, representing powerful spiritual beings. The dancers must be specially chosen and must undergo ritual preparation. The entire pueblo works together to prepare for the ceremony, cooking vast quantities of food to feed participants and guests. Further north, among the peoples of the Pacific Northwest coast, the Tlingit, Haida, Kwakwaka'wakw, and others, the winter season was marked by potlatch ceremonies. While not specifically tied to the solstice date, these winter ceremonies occurred during the dark, cold months when people gathered in their winter villages. Potlatches were complex social and religious events involving feasting, dancing, storytelling, and the giving away of goods. A host would invite guests, often from other villages, and would distribute gifts, sometimes giving away virtually all of their accumulated wealth. The more one gave away, the higher one's status. This gift-giving was not mere generosity, but a fundamental part of the social and economic system. Winter was the season for potlatches, because it was when people were together in their winter villages, when the summer's work of fishing and gathering was done, when food had been preserved and stored. The long winter nights provided time for the elaborate ceremonies, which could last for days or even weeks. The ceremonies included dramatic performances by secret societies, with dancers wearing elaborate masks representing ancestors, animals, and supernatural beings. These performances were both entertainment and sacred ritual, teaching cultural values and spiritual truths through dramatic action. The winter ceremonial season also included storytelling. Elders would tell the traditional stories, the myths and legends that explained the world and taught proper behavior. Some stories could only be told in winter, telling them at other times of year was forbidden or considered dangerous. Among the Inuit peoples of the Arctic, the winter solstice marked the return of the sun after the long polar night. In the far north, the sun doesn't rise at all for weeks or even months during winter. The winter solstice marks the moment when the sun begins its return, when the people can look forward to its eventual reappearance above the horizon. Traditional Inuit practices around the winter solstice included gatherings, storytelling, and games. The long darkness was a time for community, for strengthening social bonds, for sharing resources and stories. When the sun began to return, it was cause for celebration and hope. The Inuit have specific terms for different times of the winter. The period before the solstice, when darkness is increasing, has one name. The solstice itself has another. The period after, when light is returning, has yet another. This linguistic precision reflects the importance of these seasonal changes to people living in the Arctic. In the Great Plains, winter was traditionally a quiet time for many peoples. The buffalo herds were dispersed, hunting was difficult, and people lived in winter camps, often in protected river valleys. While we don't have extensive records of specific winter solstice ceremonies, we know that the winter months were a time for storytelling, for craft work, for maintaining and strengthening community bonds. The Lakota people have a winter ceremony called the Keeping of the Soul, which could occur at various times during the year, but was often performed in winter. This ceremony involved keeping the soul of a deceased person for a year, then releasing it in a ceremony that involved feasting and gift-giving to the entire community. In Mesoamerica, the Maya and Aztec civilizations had sophisticated astronomical observations and calendars that precisely tracked the solar year. The Maya built structures aligned with the winter solstice. At the site of Tzipilcaltén in Yucatan, a temple is positioned so that at dawn on the winter solstice, the sun shines directly through the temple doorway. The Aztec calendar included a festival called Panquetzaliztli, honoring the god Huitzilopochtli, which occurred in what corresponds roughly to December in the European calendar. This festival involved ceremonies, dances, and sacrifices, celebrating the sun god and calling for his continued strength. The Inca Empire, centered in the Andes Mountains of South America, celebrated Inti Raymi, the festival of the sun, at the winter solstice, which in the southern hemisphere occurs in June. Since the winter solstice celebrations we've been discussing are all northern hemisphere focused, the Inca Inti Raymi reminds us that the solstice experience is different depending on one's latitude and hemisphere. For the Inca, the June solstice marked the sun's farthest point north. The Inca worried that the sun might continue moving away and never return. Inti Raymi was a ceremony to call the sun back, to ensure it would return southward and bring warmth and light to the Andean highlands. The ceremony involved elaborate rituals at Cusco, the Inca capital. The emperor himself participated as he was considered a descendant of the sun. There were sacrifices, including llamas and other offerings. There was feasting and celebration. The ceremony was one of the most important in the Inca calendar. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, they suppressed Inti Raymi along with other Inca religious practices. The Spanish imposed Christianity and tried to eliminate indigenous religions. But the memory of Inti Raymi persisted. In the mid-20th century, a revival of the ceremony began in Peru, and today it's celebrated annually as both a cultural tradition and a tourist attraction, though the modern version differs from the original Inca ceremony. Across the Americas, from the Arctic to the Andes, indigenous peoples developed ways of marking and celebrating the winter solstice. These traditions were intimately connected to their environments, their subsistence patterns, their spiritual beliefs, and their social structures. The arrival of Europeans disrupted many of these traditions, sometimes suppressing them, sometimes transforming them, sometimes driving them underground, where they persisted in modified forms. Today, many indigenous communities are working to revitalize and maintain their traditional ceremonies and practices, including winter solstice observances. These efforts are part of broader movements to preserve indigenous languages, cultures, and knowledge systems that colonization threatened. Part 9. African and Southern Hemisphere Perspectives. When we think about winter solstice celebrations, we're usually thinking from a Northern Hemisphere perspective. But the solstice is a global phenomenon, experienced differently depending on where you are on Earth. In the Southern Hemisphere, the winter solstice occurs in June, not December. What we've been calling the winter solstice occurring in December is actually the summer solstice south of the equator. This flip in seasons is something we should keep in mind as we think about global perspectives on the solstice. In Africa, perspectives on the December solstice vary greatly depending on latitude. Near the equator, seasonal variations are minimal. The length of day doesn't change much throughout the year. The seasons are more about wet and dry periods than about temperature or daylight variations. But in southern Africa, farther from the equator, seasonal changes are more pronounced. The December solstice, summer solstice in the southern hemisphere, was recognized by various African peoples, though it didn't have the same significance as it did in northern latitudes, where winter could be harsh and threatening. The Zulu people of southern Africa traditionally divided the year into seasons based on weather patterns and agricultural activities rather than solar positions. However, they were aware of solar movements and used them for timekeeping and for determining the right times for planting and harvesting. Among the San people, the indigenous hunter-gatherers of southern Africa, seasonal changes were tracked carefully. The San have an intimate knowledge of their environment, knowing when different plants produce seeds or fruits, when different game animals are available, when water will be plentiful or scarce. The solstices and equinoxes were part of this broader understanding of natural cycles. In northern Africa, closer to the Mediterranean, winter could be cold, especially in mountainous regions. The Berber peoples of the Atlas Mountains and North Africa have traditional celebrations around the winter solstice period, though much of our knowledge of these traditions comes from relatively recent ethnographic work. One North African celebration is Yenaya, the Berber New Year, which falls around January 12th to 15th in the Gregorian calendar. While this is not exactly on the winter solstice, it falls in the general winter season and marks the beginning of the agricultural year. Families prepare special foods, often including dishes made with dried fruit and nuts. It's a time for family gatherings and for hoping for a prosperous year ahead. The relationship between African traditions and the winter solstice is complex because Africa is geographically vast and culturally diverse. The continent spans both hemispheres and many climate zones. Generalizations are difficult and often misleading. What we can say is that throughout Africa, people have developed sophisticated understandings of natural cycles, including solar and lunar cycles, and have created cultural practices that align with these cycles. The colonization of Africa by European powers brought Christianity and its associated celebrations, including Christmas, to many parts of the continent. In some places, Christmas celebrations incorporated African traditions, creating syncretic practices. In others, African celebrations were suppressed or transformed. In still others, traditional African practices continued alongside the imported Christian holidays. Today in southern Africa, where December is summer, Christmas often involves outdoor activities, barbecues, and going to the beach, a stark contrast to the winter imagery of Northern Hemisphere Christmas traditions. In Australia, another Southern Hemisphere location, the December solstice is the summer solstice. For Aboriginal Australians, the longest peoples on the continent, with cultures stretching back at least 65,000 years, understanding of seasonal cycles was and is sophisticated and complex. Aboriginal Australians traditionally don't divide the year into 4 seasons as Europeans do. Instead, depending on the region, there might be 6 seasons, or 7, or more, defined by ecological changes when certain plants flower, when certain animals breed, when certain winds blow. In the tropical north of Australia, the main seasonal distinction is between the wet season and the dry season. In the temperate south, the 4-season model is more applicable. The winter solstice in June and the summer solstice in December are recognised as significant points in the solar year. Aboriginal Australians have detailed astronomical knowledge encoded in their oral traditions. Certain stars and constellations mark the proper times for harvesting certain foods or conducting certain ceremonies. The solar cycle, including the solstices, is part of this broader astronomical understanding. With European colonisation beginning in the late 18th century, Aboriginal Australians were subjected to violent displacement and cultural suppression. Many traditional practices were forbidden or became impossible to maintain when people were removed from their traditional lands. However, Aboriginal cultures persisted, and today there's ongoing work to revitalise and maintain traditional knowledge, including astronomical and seasonal knowledge. In modern Australia, which is largely a settler society descended from European immigrants, Christmas in December summer creates an odd situation. All the traditional Christmas imagery is about winter, snow, pine trees, warm fires. But Australian Christmas occurs in hot weather, the height of summer. Some Australians have embraced this contradiction, having barbecues on the beach while wearing Santa hats. Others have worked to create more locally appropriate traditions. In New Zealand, the Maori people, who arrived around 700 years ago, developed a detailed understanding of the seasons and celestial cycles. The Maori lunar calendar includes the month of Pipiri, which corresponds roughly to June, the time of the winter solstice in the southern hemisphere. The Maori have traditional celebrations called Matariki, occurring in midwinter around June or early July, marking the rising of the Pleiades star cluster. While not precisely a solstice celebration, Matariki occurs around the winter solstice period and marks the Maori New Year. It's a time for remembering the dead, celebrating the present, and planning for the future. In recent decades, Matariki has been revitalised as a celebration throughout New Zealand, not just among Māori. It became an official public holiday in 2022, making New Zealand one of the few countries with an Indigenous celebration as a national public holiday. These Southern Hemisphere and African perspectives remind us that the winter solstice, while a global astronomical event, is experienced differently depending on where you are. The meanings people attach to it, the ways they mark it, the significance it holds all vary based on geography, climate, culture, and history. Part 10. The Science and Astronomy of the Winter Solstice. Let's turn now to the scientific understanding of the winter solstice. What exactly is happening astronomically? Why does this event occur? How do we predict its precise timing? The Earth orbits the Sun once per year, taking approximately 365¼ days to complete one orbit. This is why we have a leap year every 4 years to account for those quarter days adding up. But the Earth doesn't orbit upright. Its axis of rotation is tilted by approximately 23½ degrees relative to the plane of its orbit. This tilt is called the obliquity of the ecliptic, and it's the fundamental reason we have seasons. As the Earth orbits the Sun, this tilt remains pointed in the same direction in space toward the North Star, Polaris. This means that at different points in the orbit, different hemispheres are tilted toward or away from the Sunday. When the northern hemisphere is tilted toward the Sun, it receives more direct sunlight, the days are longer, and it's summer in the north. At the same time, the southern hemisphere is tilted away from the Sun, receives less direct sunlight, has shorter days, and experiences winter. 6 months later, the Earth is on the opposite side of its orbit. Now the southern hemisphere is tilted toward the sun summer in the south, and the northern hemisphere is tilted away winter in the north. The solstices mark the extreme points of this cycle. At the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere, the North Pole is tilted its maximum distance away from the Sunday. The Sun appears at its lowest point in the sky at noon. The day is shortest and the night is longest. Specifically, at the moment of the winter solstice, the Sun appears directly overhead at the Tropic of Capricorn, a circle of latitude at approximately 23½ degrees south of the equator. This is as far south as the Sun ever appears to be directly overhead. From the northern hemisphere's perspective, the Sun has been moving southward in the sky since the summer solstice in June. Each day at noon, it appears a bit lower in the sky. Each day is a bit shorter than the one before. This continues until the winter solstice, when the Sun reaches its southernmost point. Then something remarkable happens. The Sun stops moving southward and begins to move northward again. The word solstice comes from Latin words meaning sun stands still. At the solstice, the Sun's apparent northward or southward movement stops and reverses. After the winter solstice, each day in the northern hemisphere becomes slightly longer than the one before. The Sun climbs slightly higher in the noon sky. This continues until the summer solstice in June, when the process reverses again. The exact moment of the winter solstice can be calculated with great precision. In 2025, the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere will occur on December 21st at 9:03 Greenwich Mean Time. This precision is possible because we understand the mechanics of Earth's orbit very well. However, the solstice is an instantaneous moment, not a full day. When we talk about the winter solstice as a day, we're really referring to the day on which the solstice moment occurs, the actual instant when the sun reaches its southernmost point lasts only a moment. The latitude where you are affects your experience of the solstice dramatically. At the equator, 0 degrees latitude, day and night, are almost equal length year-round. The solstices don't create dramatic changes in day length. But as you move toward the poles, the seasonal variation becomes more extreme. At 40 degrees north latitude, roughly the latitude of New York, Madrid, or Beijing, the winter solstice brings about 9 hours of daylight. At 50 degrees north, roughly London, Amsterdam, or the Canada-US border winter solstice, daylight lasts only about 8 hours. At the Arctic Circle, 66.5 degrees north, something remarkable happens. On the winter solstice, the sun doesn't rise at all. There's a period of twilight around midday, but the sun remains below the horizon. This is the beginning of the polar night. North of the Arctic Circle, the polar night lasts longer the farther north you go. At the North Pole itself, 90 degrees north, the sun sets at the autumn equinox and doesn't rise again until the spring equinox, 6 months of darkness, with the winter solstice marking the midpoint. The experience of the winter solstice at extreme latitudes must be profound. In northern Alaska, northern Scandinavia, northern Russia, northern Canada, places where the sun doesn't rise for weeks or months, the solstice marks the turning point. The people there know that from this moment on, each day brings them closer to the sun's return. The precise timing of sunrise and sunset around the solstice is interesting. You might think that the earliest sunset would occur on the winter solstice, the shortest day, but actually, the earliest sunset occurs several days before the solstice, and the latest sunrise occurs several days after. This happens because of something called the equation of time, which relates to the fact that the Earth's orbit is slightly elliptical rather than perfectly circular, and the tilt of the Earth's axis. The result is that solar noon, when the sun is highest in the sky, doesn't always occur at exactly 12 o'clock clock time. The consequence is that sunset begins getting later in early December before the solstice, while sunrise continues getting later until early January after the solstice. The shortest day, the least total daylight occurs at the solstice, but the earliest sunset and latest sunrise are separated by several weeks. For ancient peoples without clocks or precise calendars, determining the exact day of the solstice would have required careful observation. One method is to track the position of sunrise or sunset on the horizon. For several days around the solstice, the sun rises and sets at almost exactly the same spot on the horizon. Only careful, patient observation over many days would reveal the subtle shift that indicates the solstice has passed and the sun is now moving in the opposite direction. Another method is to track the sun's altitude at noon using a gnomon, a vertical stick or post. The shadow cast by the gnomon at noon grows longer each day approaching the winter solstice, then begins to shorten afterward. By marking the shadow's length each day, observers can determine when the sun has reached its lowest point. These observation methods require dedication, precision, and record keeping over long periods. The fact that prehistoric peoples built monuments aligned to the solstice tells us they had this dedication and precision. They watched the sky carefully, recorded their observations somehow, perhaps with marks on stone or wood, perhaps orally, and used this knowledge to create structures that would mark the solstice for generations to come. Modern astronomy has revealed much more about the solstices and seasons. We understand that the Earth's axial tilt hasn't been constant over very long timescales. Over a cycle of about 41,000 years, the tilt varies between about 22 and 24.5 degrees. Currently, it's about 23.5 degrees and is decreasing slowly. This change in tilt affects the intensity of seasons. When the tilt is greater, seasons are more extreme. When it's less, seasons are milder. Over tens of thousands of years, this cycling has influenced Earth's climate, contributing to the Ice Age cycles. The direction that Earth's axis points also changes over time, a phenomenon called axial precession. Currently, the North Pole points roughly toward Polaris, the North Star. But this wasn't always the case, and won't be in the future. About 14,000 years ago, the North Pole pointed toward the star Vega. About 14,000 years from now, it will point toward Vega again. This cycle takes about 26,000 years. Axial precession means that the timing of the seasons relative to Earth's position in its orbit changes slowly. Currently, the Northern Hemisphere winter occurs when Earth is closest to the Sun, a point called perihelion. But in about 13,000 years, Northern Hemisphere winter will occur when Earth is farthest from the Sun, aphelion, making Northern Hemisphere winters more severe and summers milder. These long-term astronomical cycles affect Earth's climate over millennia, but on the timescale of human lifetimes, the solstices occur with predictable regularity. Each year, the winter solstice comes, marking the longest night and the promise of returning light. There's something profound about this predictability. In a changing, uncertain world, the solstice is constant. Generation after generation, century after century, millennium after millennium, the sun reaches its lowest point and begins its return. This cosmic reliability must have been deeply reassuring to ancient peoples, and perhaps it can still be reassuring to us today. Part 11. Modern secular and neo-pagan celebrations. In the modern world, the winter solstice is celebrated in a variety of ways that don't fit neatly into traditional religious categories. Let's explore some of these contemporary observances. As we've mentioned, modern neo-paganism and Wicca have embraced the winter solstice as one of their major festivals. The modern pagan calendar, often called the Wheel of the Year, includes 8 sabbats, the 2 solstices, the 2 equinoxes, and 4 cross-quarter days between them. The winter solstice in this system is called Yule, borrowing from Germanic tradition. Modern pagans typically celebrate Yule as a time of rebirth and renewal. The longest night gives way to dawn, and from this point forward, the sun grows stronger and the days lengthen. Common practices in modern pagan Yule celebrations include lighting candles or bonfires, decorating with evergreens and holly, exchanging gifts, feasting, and performing rituals. Some pagans wake before dawn on the solstice to witness the sunrise, greeting the returning sun with prayers or chants. Many modern pagans create altars for Yule, decorated with symbols of the season: evergreens, pine cones, red and green colours, representations of the sun, candles, and winter blooming plants like holly and ivy. They might burn a Yule log in their fireplace, or, if they don't have a fireplace, use a log decorated with candles as a centerpiece. Modern pagan Yule celebrations often incorporate elements from various historical traditions. A ceremony might include Anglo-Saxon prayers, Celtic symbolism, Roman customs, and modern innovations, all blended together. This eclectic approach is characteristic of much modern neo-paganism, which freely draws from multiple sources to create meaningful contemporary practices. Some pagans observe Yule with structured rituals. A typical ritual might involve casting a circle, calling on the 4 directions or elements, invoking deities associated with winter and the sun, making offerings, sharing food and drink, and closing the circle. The specific details vary widely depending on the tradition and the preferences of the participants. Beyond formal neo-pagan communities, there's a broader interest in marking the winter solstice in a secular or spiritual but not religious way. Many people who don't identify as pagan are nonetheless drawn to the natural symbolism of the solstice, the return of light, the promise of spring, the turning of the year. In recent decades, gatherings at prehistoric monuments on the winter solstice have become popular. At Stonehenge in England, thousands of people gather for the sunrise on the winter solstice, just as they do for the summer solstice. English Heritage, which manages Stonehenge, opens the stones to the public for these occasions, allowing people to enter the monument itself. The gathering at Stonehenge is diverse. There are druids in ceremonial robes, Wiccans and pagans, tourists with cameras, historians, astronomy enthusiasts, and people who simply want to experience this ancient place at a significant moment. Some come for spiritual reasons, others for cultural or educational reasons, others simply for the experience. As the sun rises, aligning with the stones, there's often a moment of collective quiet, a shared acknowledgement of something significant. Then cheering, drumming, music, and celebration. It's a thoroughly modern event, yet it connects to something ancient, to the thousands of years when people have gathered at this place to mark the solstice. Similar gatherings occur at other ancient sites. At Newgrange in Ireland, access to the chamber during the winter solstice sunrise is by lottery, as the space is small and demand is enormous. Those lucky enough to be selected stand in the darkness of the chamber, waiting for that shaft of sunlight to penetrate down the passage, the same experience the tomb's Neolithic builders intended 5,000 years ago. In the United States, there are solstice gatherings at various locations. Some are explicitly pagan or neo-pagan events. Others are more secular, framed as cultural or educational experiences. Parks and nature centres might host solstice walks or talks. Observatories open for solstice viewing events. The Montezuma Castle National Monument in Arizona hosts a winter solstice event where visitors can observe how sunlight interacts with the ancient cliff dwelling at this time of year. This connects visitors to the astronomical observations of the Sinagua people who built the structure in the 12th century. In Santa Fe, New Mexico, the winter solstice is marked by Canyon Road luminarias, where thousands of small paper bag lanterns line the street, creating a river of light. While this tradition is now associated with Christmas, it has roots in older practices of creating light during the darkest time of year. Cities around the world have begun creating secular winter solstice events. These often emphasize the astronomical aspect, the actual moment when the Earth reaches that specific point in its orbit, and frame the celebration in terms of science and nature rather than religion. Some communities host solstice lantern walks, where people make paper lanterns and walk together in procession, creating moving light in the darkness. This activity works for all ages and doesn't require any specific religious or spiritual framework. It's simply a way of marking the dark and celebrating the promise of returning light. In recent years, the term Festivus, coined by the television show Seinfeld, has gained some traction as a secular alternative to religious winter holidays. While Festivus is primarily humorous, it reflects a genuine desire among some people for a non-religious way to mark this season. Festivus occurs on December 23rd and involves putting up an aluminum pole instead of a tree, airing grievances, and demonstrating feats of strength. Its humour doesn't diminish the underlying point. People want to gather, celebrate, and mark this time of year, regardless of their religious beliefs or lack thereof. The winter solstice has also found a place in popular culture beyond Festivus. Films, books, and television shows reference solstice celebrations. Fantasy literature often incorporates solstice festivals, sometimes drawing on historical traditions, sometimes inventing new ones. These fictional portrayals influence how people imagine and sometimes practice solstice celebrations in real life. One interesting modern development is the Blue Christmas, or longest night services held by some Christian churches. These services, typically held around the winter solstice, acknowledge that the holiday season can be difficult for people dealing with grief, loss, loneliness, or depression. Rather than emphasizing joy and celebration, these services create space for sadness and struggle. They embrace the darkness of the longest night rather than trying to immediately leap to the light. This development shows how the actual experience of winter darkness, the long nights, the cold, the sense of being in the depths of the year, resonates even when religious frameworks have changed. The winter solstice isn't just an astronomical event or a historical curiosity. It's something we still experience viscerally, and we still seek ways to acknowledge and mark it. Environmental and sustainability movements have also embraced the solstice. The turning of the seasons, the cycles of nature, the importance of living in harmony with natural rhythms all resonate with environmental values. Some environmental organizations host solstice events focused on nature connection and ecological awareness. Climate change has given the solstice new poignancy. As we alter the Earth's climate, the predictability of seasons begins to shift. Winters become milder in some places, more extreme in others. The reliable cycle that has reassured humans for millennia may become less reliable. This makes marking the solstice, acknowledging the natural cycles that persist despite our disruption, feel even more important. In the southern hemisphere, June solstice celebrations are less common historically, as these regions were colonized relatively recently and adopted northern hemisphere Christmas traditions. But there's growing interest in developing southern hemisphere appropriate winter solstice traditions in June, celebrating the actual winter in these regions rather than the northern hemisphere's seasons. Some Australian pagans celebrate Yule in June, acknowledging their actual winter. Some Christian churches in Australia have experimented with June Christmas services, though this remains uncommon. It's a reminder that our seasonal traditions are often tied to specific geographies and don't always translate directly when transplanted to different regions. Part 12. Food, Feast, and Winter Solstice Traditions. Throughout human cultures and across the millennia, food has been central to winter solstice celebrations. Let's explore the culinary aspects of these traditions, the symbolic meanings of winter foods, and the significance of feasting in the darkest season. Feasting during midwinter has practical origins. In agricultural societies, the harvest was complete by the winter solstice. The year's crops had been gathered, preserved, dried, and stored. Animals that couldn't be fed through winter had been slaughtered, and their meat preserved through smoking, salting, or the cold itself. Midwinter was actually a time of relative plenty in terms of stored food. At the same time, it was unclear how long the stored food would need to last. Spring was still months away. If the winter was harsh or extended, food supplies could run dangerously low by late winter. But at the solstice, shortly after the harvest, supplies were still good. This made it a suitable time for generous feasting. The Roman Saturnalia, as we discussed, involved abundant feasting. Wealthy Romans would prepare elaborate meals for their families and dependents. The poet Martial describes meals with dormice, sausages, thrushes, wine, and sweets. This was a time to enjoy the abundance that the year's work had produced. In medieval England, the Christmas feast could last for days or weeks, depending on one's social position. The aristocracy and royalty feasted elaborately. We have records of astounding quantities of food prepared for royal Christmas celebrations. For example, for Christmas of 1247, at the court of King Henry III, cooks prepared 600 oxen, 10,000 eels, and 850 capons, among other foods. The Christmas feast in medieval times typically centred on meat, beef, pork, mutton, goose, and game birds were all common. In wealthy households, there might be elaborate meat dishes like boar's head, peacock served in its own feathers for display, or swan. These showy centerpieces were as much about display and status as about food itself. Pies were important in medieval Christmas feasts, but not the sweet fruit pies we think of today. Medieval pies were often savoury, filled with meat, and served in elaborate pastry cases that might be decorated or formed into complex shapes. The pastry itself wasn't always meant to be eaten, it served as a cooking vessel and container. Mince pies do have medieval origins. Originally, they contained meat along with fruits and spices. Mincemeat literally meant minced meat. The pies were often made in an oblong shape, said to represent Jesus' manger, with a pastry figure on top representing the baby. Over time, meat disappeared from mince pies in most recipes, leaving the sweet fruit and spice mixture we know today. Wassail, a hot, mulled cider drink, was traditional in England. The word wassail comes from Old English and means be healthy or be whole. People would go wassailing, visiting neighbours with a bowl of wassail, singing and receiving gifts of food or money in return. The wassail drink typically contained ale or cider, spices, sugar, and sometimes roasted apples. Plum pudding, also called Christmas pudding, developed in England over centuries. Despite its name, it doesn't actually contain plums in the modern sense. Plum was an old term for raisins or other dried fruit. Christmas pudding is dense and rich, made with dried fruits, suet, breadcrumbs, eggs, and alcohol, usually brandy or rum. It's traditionally made weeks before Christmas, allowing the flavours to mature. Coins, buttons, or other small objects were sometimes hidden in the pudding, and finding one in your serving was considered lucky. The tradition of stirring the Christmas pudding involved the whole family. Each family member would take a turn stirring the mixture from east to west in honour of the 3 wise men while making a wish. This communal participation in food preparation made the pudding not just a dish, but a ritual that bound the family together. In Germany, the Christmas season brought its own special foods. Stollen, a dense fruit bread with a tunnel of marzipan through the centre, dusted with powdered sugar, is traditional. The white sugar is said to represent the swaddling clothes of the infant Jesus, but the bread itself has pre-Christian origins as a winter food. Lebkuchen, German gingerbread, was traditionally baked for Christmas. These spiced cookies, often elaborately decorated, have been made for centuries. The German city of Nuremberg is particularly famous for its Lebkuchen, with records of production dating back to at least 1395. In Scandinavia, winter foods reflected the available ingredients and preservation methods. Lutefisk, dried fish preserved in lye, is a traditional Christmas food in Norway and among Norwegian American communities, though it's an acquired taste. Pickled herring, smoked salmon, and preserved meats were all important winter foods. Swedish Christmas includes the julbord, a buffet of traditional dishes. This typically includes various types of herring, smoked and cured salmon, meatballs, sausages, ham, pâtés, cheeses, and many types of bread and crackers. The julbord is abundant, showcasing a variety of preserved and prepared foods. Rice porridge, or rice pudding, is traditional in Scandinavian Christmas celebrations. A single almond is hidden in the porridge, and whoever finds it receives a prize, often a marzipan pig. This tradition of hiding something in the food and making finding it auspicious is common across many cultures. In France, the Christmas meal, called Réveillon, occurs after midnight mass on Christmas Eve. It's an elaborate, lengthy meal that might last until dawn. Traditional dishes vary by region, but often include oysters, foie gras, roasted poultry, and various elaborate desserts. The bûche de Noël, or Yule log cake, is traditional in France. This rolled sponge cake, filled with cream and decorated to look like a wooden log with bark texture and mushrooms made of meringue, represents the Yule log that would burn in the fireplace. When fewer people had fireplaces, the edible log cake maintains the symbol. In Italy, the Christmas Eve feast, called the Feast of the Seven Fishes, involves multiple seafood dishes, though the number isn't always exactly 7. This tradition comes from southern Italy and has been maintained and adapted by Italian-American communities. The fish dishes might include bacala, calamari, shrimp, clams, and various other seafood preparations. Panettone, the sweet bread studded with dried fruit and candied peel, is traditional Italian Christmas food. It originated in Milan and has become popular worldwide. The tall, domed shape and light, airy texture require specific baking techniques and patience. In Poland, the Christmas Eve feast, called Wigilia, traditionally consists of 12 courses, representing the 12 apostles. The meal begins when the first star appears in the evening sky. Traditional dishes include beet soup, pierogi, carp, and various mushroom dishes. An extra place is often set at the table for an unexpected guest or for the spirits of deceased family members. In Mexico and other Latin American countries, tamales are traditional Christmas food. These corn dough packets, filled with various meats, cheeses, or vegetables, wrapped in corn husks or banana leaves and steamed, require significant labor to produce. Making tamales is often a communal activity, with family members working together. Ponche, a hot fruit punch made with tejocotes, guavas, apples, pears, sugarcane, cinnamon, and other ingredients, is traditional in Mexico during Christmas time. It's served hot, perfect for the winter season, though Mexico's winter is milder than northern latitudes. In Eastern European Jewish traditions, while Hanukkah doesn't fall precisely on the solstice, it occurs in this same winter season and has its own food traditions. Latkes, potato pancakes fried in oil, are traditional, commemorating the miracle of the oil that burned for 8 days. Sufganiot, jelly-filled donuts, are another fried food traditional for Hanukkah. In China, as we discussed, Tang Yuan sweet rice balls are traditional for Dongzhi. The round shape symbolizes family reunion and completeness. The act of eating Tang Yuan together represents the family's unity. In northern China, dumplings fill this same symbolic role. In Japan, eating kabocha squash on the winter solstice is traditional. The bright orange colour represents the sun and is believed to ward off illness. There's also a tradition of eating foods whose names contain the syllable N, foods like ninjin, carrot, renkon, lotus root, nankotsu, chicken cartilage, and others. This play on language represents bringing good luck. In Iran, for Yalda night, pomegranates and watermelons are essential. The red colour represents the dawn and the glow of life. Nuts and dried fruits are also traditional. Families share these foods while reading poetry and telling stories through the long night. The symbolic meanings of winter solstice foods recur across cultures. Red foods, pomegranates, red wine, berries often represent the sun, life, and blood. Round foods, the tangyuan, round nuts, round cookies represent wholeness, completion, and the sun. Preserved foods, dried fruits, salted meats, pickled vegetables represent human cleverness in storing summer's abundance for winter's scarcity. Spices appear in many winter solstice foods. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, ginger. These warming spices were precious commodities, expensive and imported from distant lands. Using them in winter foods was both practical, as they warmed the body, and symbolic, displaying wealth and transforming ordinary ingredients into special feast foods. Alcohol also features prominently in many winter solstice celebrations. Wine, ale, mead, cider, brandy, rum fermented, and distilled drinks appear in nearly every culture that developed such technology. Alcohol warms the body, lowers inhibitions, facilitates social bonding, and transforms ordinary consciousness. The communal drinking that occurs at winter solstice feasts serves social and psychological functions beyond mere nutrition. The act of feasting together, sitting down with family, community, or clan to share abundant food is perhaps more important than the specific foods themselves. In traditional societies, where individual meals might be simple and portions modest, the feast was a special time of abundance and togetherness. It reinforced social bonds, redistributed resources from those with more to those with less, and created shared memories and experiences. Even in our modern world of abundance, where food is generally plentiful year-round for those with means, the special winter feast retains significance. Preparing elaborate meals, gathering family and friends, sitting together for hours to eat and talk, these activities still create meaning and connection. The foods might have changed, the specific dishes might be different, but the underlying human need to gather and feast in the darkest season persists. Part 13. Lights, Candles and Illumination in Winter Darkness. If food is one universal element of winter solstice celebrations, light is the other. Across cultures and throughout history, humans have responded to winter darkness by creating light. Let's explore the various forms this has taken and the meanings attached to it. The most basic form of artificial light is fire. For most of human history, fire was the only source of light after dark. The hearth fire, kept burning throughout the cold months, was literally the centre of the home. It provided warmth, light, a place to cook, and a gathering point for the household. During winter solstice celebrations, fires often took on special significance. The Yule log, which we've mentioned several times, represents this tradition. A large log, carefully selected, would be brought in and placed in the fireplace. It would burn throughout the Yule celebration, ideally for the full 12 days of Christmas or the entire duration of the winter solstice festival. The Yule log wasn't just fuel, it was symbolic. A piece of the previous year's log would be saved to light the new log, creating continuity from year to year. The ash from the Yule log might be saved and used for protection, fertility, or healing. In some traditions, the log was decorated before burning with holly or ivy, or marked with symbols. In some places, the Yule log was not burned, but kept as a centerpiece, decorated with candles, evergreens, and ribbons. This transition from functional fire to decorative object shows how traditions adapt when circumstances change. When fewer people had fireplaces large enough to burn a log for days, the symbolic log cake or decorative log maintained the tradition. Bonfires were another form of ritual fire. In parts of Europe, communities would build large bonfires at the winter solstice. People would gather around the fire, singing, dancing, telling stories, and keeping warm. The bonfire served practical purposes, providing light and warmth, but also symbolic ones, representing the sun and the hope of its return. Some traditions involved rolling burning wheels down hills at the winter solstice. The flaming wheel represented the sun rolling across the sky. This practice was recorded in various parts of Europe and may have ancient origins, though our earliest clear records come from the medieval period. Candles represent a more refined form of artificial light. Candle making developed gradually over millennia. Early candles were made from tallow, animal fat, which burned with a smoky, smelly flame. Later, beeswax candles provided cleaner burning and a pleasant honey scent, but were expensive. In the 19th century, stearine and paraffin candles made candles cheaper and more widely available. The use of candles in winter celebrations is nearly universal wherever candles were available. Candles were lit in windows to welcome travellers. They decorated Christmas trees and Hanukkah menorahs. They were placed on Yule altars and solstice shrines. They were carried in processions and set afloat on water. The symbolism of the candle is rich. A small flame holding back the darkness, a light that can be passed from person to person without diminishing, a gentle glow that transforms a space. The act of lighting a candle can be meditative, contemplative, even prayerful. In modern times, electric lights have largely replaced candles for practical illumination, but candles retain their ceremonial and symbolic significance. People still light candles for winter solstice celebrations, for Christmas, for Hanukkah, for New Year's Eve, for any occasion that calls for something beyond mere functional lighting. The development of electric lighting in the late 19th and early 20th centuries transformed winter celebrations. Now it became possible to create elaborate displays of lights, to illuminate entire buildings or streets, to make the winter darkness blaze with light. Christmas lights, now a ubiquitous part of winter in many countries, have an interesting history. The tradition began with candles on Christmas trees. The practice of placing candles on evergreen trees became popular in Germany in the 16th or 17th century and spread to other countries. Candles on a tree created a magical effect, but were also dangerously flammable. Many homes burned because of Christmas tree fires. The development of electric Christmas lights solved this problem. Thomas Edison's associate Edward Johnson created the first electric Christmas lights in 1882, stringing together 80 red, white, and blue electric bulbs and placing them on his Christmas tree. But electric Christmas lights didn't become common until the early 20th century, when electricity became more widely available and affordable. By the mid-20th century, electric Christmas lights had become standard in America and were spreading to other countries. The technology evolved from large bulbs to small bulbs, from single colours to multiple colours, from static lights to blinking lights to programmable light shows. Today, entire neighbourhoods compete to create the most elaborate Christmas light displays. Some displays are synchronized to music, with thousands or even millions of lights flashing in patterns. What began as a simple candle in a window has evolved into complex technological spectacle, yet the underlying impulse is the same. In the darkest time of the year, we create light. We push back against the darkness. We affirm life, warmth, hope, and community through the medium of illumination. Different winter festivals have their own specific light traditions. Hanukkah, the Jewish festival of lights, occurs around the winter solstice time. While Hanukkah celebrates a specific historical event, the rededication of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in the 2nd century BCE, and the miracle of oil that burned for 8 days. It also fits the broader pattern of winter light festivals. The Hanukkah menorah, or Hanukkah, holds 9 candles, 8 for the 8 nights of Hanukkah, plus a shamash, or helper candle, used to light the others. Each night, 1 additional candle is lit, so that by the 8th night, all 8 candles plus the shamash burn together. The menorah is traditionally placed in a window where it can be seen from outside, publicizing the miracle. The progressive lighting of the Hanukkah candles, adding 1 each night until reaching the full 8, mirrors the gradual return of light after the winter solstice. While this parallel is probably coincidental, Hanukkah's timing is based on the Hebrew lunar calendar, not the solar calendar. The resonance is there nonetheless. Diwali, the Hindu festival of lights, occurs in autumn rather than winter, usually in October or November, but it shares the theme of light triumphing over darkness. During Diwali, homes are decorated with oil lamps called diyas, creating brilliant displays of flickering light. The festival celebrates the return of the god Rama after defeating the demon Ravana, and light symbolizes the victory of good over evil, knowledge over ignorance. Kwanzaa, created in 1966 by Maulana Karenga as an African-American cultural celebration, occurs from December 26th through January 1st. While it's a modern creation rather than an ancient tradition, it incorporates the theme of light. The kinara, a candle holder, holds 7 candles representing 7 principles. 1 candle is lit each night, similar to the Hanukkah tradition. These various winter light festivals, whether ancient or modern, religious or secular, all draw on the same deep human response to darkness. We are diurnal creatures. We evolved in sunlight. Darkness is when predators hunt, when we are most vulnerable, when we cannot see dangers. Light represents safety, community, consciousness, and life itself. In the modern developed world, we have largely eliminated darkness. Electric lights allow us to stay active around the clock. We can illuminate our homes, streets, and cities so thoroughly that darkness is almost banished. Light pollution makes it impossible to see stars in many urban areas. We've traded the darkness our ancestors knew for constant illumination. This makes the deliberate lighting of candles, the mindful creation of light during the winter solstice, perhaps more significant than ever. In a world of constant artificial light, the act of lighting a single candle and sitting in its glow, of turning off all the electric lights and experiencing real darkness before bringing light into it, becomes a conscious choice to connect with something older and deeper. The popularity of solstice lantern walks, where people make paper lanterns and walk together carrying them in the darkness, speaks to this hunger for meaningful light. These events create temporary communities of light bearers, moving through the darkness together, creating something beautiful and ephemeral. When the walk ends and the lanterns are extinguished, the darkness returns, but the experience of having created and shared light remains. Part 14. The Winter Solstice and Personal Reflection. Beyond the communal celebrations, the historical traditions, and the cultural practices, the winter solstice offers something else, an opportunity for personal reflection and inner work. Let's explore this quieter, more introspective aspect of the darkest time of the year. The winter solstice marks a turning point. The sun has reached its lowest, weakest point. The darkness has reached its maximum extent. From here, there's only one direction, toward the light. This makes the solstice a natural time for reflection on our own lives, our own darkness, and our own potential for renewal. In many spiritual traditions, darkness is not merely the absence of light, but a necessary condition for growth and transformation. Seeds germinate in darkness underground. A fetus grows in the darkness of the womb. The psyche processes experiences during the darkness of sleep. Darkness is generative, protective, and transformative. The Swiss psychologist Carl Jung wrote about the importance of confronting one's shadow, the unconscious aspects of personality that we deny or repress. This psychological work requires entering darkness, facing uncomfortable truths, acknowledging difficult feelings. Jung suggested that wholeness comes not from eliminating darkness, but from integrating it, accepting it as part of oneself. The winter solstice, the time of greatest darkness, can be seen as an invitation to do this shadow work. What are the parts of ourselves we keep hidden? What fears do we not want to acknowledge? What grief have we not processed? The long, dark nights of winter provide time and space for this inner work. This doesn't mean winter should be depressing or morbid. Rather, it means winter offers permission to slow down, to go inward, to rest and reflect in ways that the busy, outward-focused energy of summer doesn't allow. In agricultural societies, winter was necessarily a time of reduced activity. The fields lay dormant. The work of planting, tending, and harvesting was complete. Animals were sheltered. The work that remained, repairing tools, mending clothes, processing stored food, could be done indoors at a leisurely pace. Our modern lives rarely permit this kind of seasonal rest. We maintain the same pace year-round, the same work hours, the same expectations, but our bodies and psyches still carry ancient rhythms. We may feel tired in winter, sluggish, less motivated. Rather than fighting this, the solstice invites us to honor it. Winter is a time for rest, for restoration, for building up reserves for spring's renewal. Meditation and contemplative practices can be particularly powerful around the winter solstice. Sitting in silence, watching the breath, observing thoughts without attachment, these practices allow us to touch the stillness and quietness that winter embodies. The external darkness can be mirrored by an internal turning inward, a descent into the depths of consciousness. Some people use the winter solstice as a time for personal ritual. This might be writing down things they want to release from their lives and burning the paper in a candle flame, symbolically letting go. Or writing intentions for the coming year as the light begins to return. Or spending a night in silence and solitude, keeping vigil through the longest night. The solstice can be a time for gratitude practice, acknowledging what we have, what we've accomplished in the year just ending, what blessings we've received. Gratitude doesn't deny difficulty or pain, but rather acknowledges goodness alongside hardship in the dark season. Naming what we're grateful for becomes an act of bringing light. For those dealing with grief, depression, or difficult life circumstances, the winter solstice's association with darkness can be validating. It's okay to be in darkness. It's okay to not be cheerful and bright. The solstice says, darkness has its place, its time, its purpose. You don't have to pretend to be sunny when you feel dark. At the same time, the solstice promises that darkness doesn't last forever. The sun will return, light will grow. This isn't toxic positivity. It's not denying present darkness by insisting on premature brightness. It's acknowledging that cycles exist, that darkness and light alternate, that what is now won't be forever. The practice of sitting with darkness, whether literal darkness with lights off and candles lit, or metaphorical darkness of difficult emotions and experiences, builds a kind of resilience and depth. When we can be present with what is, without immediately trying to fix or change or escape it, we develop a capacity for acceptance that serves us well in all aspects of life. The winter solstice can be a time for creative work. Many artists, writers, and musicians report being more productive in winter. The shorter days and longer nights create more time for indoor activities. The darkness can feel protective, cozy, conducive to focus. There's less distraction, fewer demands for outdoor social activities. Reading is a perfect winter solstice activity. Long novels, challenging books, immersive stories winter provides time for sustained reading. The act of settling into a book by lamplight or candlelight, perhaps with a warm drink and a blanket, is quintessentially winter. It's a way of creating an interior world when the exterior world is cold and dark. Journaling around the solstice can provide insights. Writing about the year that's ending, what we learned, what we survived, what we accomplished, what we regret, what we celebrated. This process of reflection through writing can clarify our experiences and help us integrate them. Writing about hopes and intentions for the coming year as the light returns can help focus our energy and attention. Dream work is also appropriate for the winter solstice. The long nights provide more sleep and more dreams. Paying attention to dreams, recording them, reflecting on their symbols and emotions, this engages with the unconscious in ways that can be revelatory. Carl Jung saw dreams as messages from the unconscious, offering guidance and insight if we learn their language. The winter solstice can be a time to examine our relationship with darkness and light more broadly. Are we comfortable with silence and solitude? Can we sit with difficult emotions without immediately trying to escape through distraction or consumption? Do we allow ourselves rest and restoration? Or do we drive ourselves relentlessly, ignoring our body's signals for rest? Modern life, especially in industrialized societies, tends to privilege light over darkness, action over rest, productivity over restoration. We're encouraged to be always on, always available, always producing. The winter solstice offers a counterbalance, permission to embrace a different mode of being. In northern latitudes, where winter darkness is most extreme, the challenge of maintaining mental health through the dark season is real. Seasonal affective disorder affects many people, causing depression, lethargy, and difficulty functioning during winter months. Light therapy exposure to bright artificial light helps many people with SAD. This medical response to lack of light validates what humans have always known. We need light to thrive. Yet even while acknowledging the real difficulties of winter darkness, we can also honour what it offers. The forced slowing down, the time for introspection, the stark beauty of bare trees and grey skies, the coziness of being indoors when it's cold outside, the way snow transforms a landscape, covering everything in quiet white. The winter solstice invites a both-and approach, acknowledging difficulty while finding meaning, accepting darkness while celebrating light's return, honouring rest while maintaining hope. This balanced approach reflects the natural world, which doesn't rush from winter to summer, but moves through gradual transitions, each season having its place and purpose. Part 15. Music, Poetry, and the Arts of Winter Solstice. Throughout human history, art has been part of winter solstice celebrations. Let's explore how music, poetry, visual arts, and performance have marked this darkest time of the year. Music and the winter solstice have been connected since ancient times. The midwinter festivals we've discussed, Saturnalia, Yule, Soyal, and others all included music as an essential component. Drums, flutes, lyres, voices, whatever instruments a culture had were played during solstice celebrations. Singing was particularly important. Before recorded music, before written scores, human voices were the most accessible and universal musical instrument. community singing brought people together, synchronized their breathing and emotions, created a sense of unity and shared experience. The tradition of caroling developed from earlier practices of going door-to-door singing in exchange for food or drink. The word carol originally meant a circle dance with singing, and only later came to specifically mean Christmas songs. Medieval and Renaissance carols were often quite different from modern ones, more earthy, sometimes bawdy, reflecting the festive and sometimes rowdy nature of midwinter celebrations. Many traditional carols have roots in folk songs that long predate their Christianization. The holly and the ivy, for example, references pre-Christian symbolism even in its Christian form. The holly, with its sharp leaves and red berries, was masculine. The ivy, with its climbing, clinging growth, was feminine. Together, they represented balance and fertility. Classical composers have created works inspired by winter and the solstice season. Antonio Vivaldi's Winter from the Four Seasons depicts winter's fierce storms and bitter cold, but also the coziness of sitting by the fire while rain patters on the windows. The music is vivid and programmatic, painting scenes through sound. Tchaikovsky's The Nutcracker, premiered in 1892, has become inseparable from the winter holiday season, at least in Western countries. Its performance every winter by ballet companies worldwide makes it a de facto winter solstice tradition. The music is lush, melodic, and magical, perfectly capturing the wonder of winter fantasy. Handel's Messiah, first performed in 1742, is performed countless times each winter season. While it's an explicitly Christian work, telling the story of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, it's also simply magnificent music, and its Hallelujah chorus has transcended its religious origins to become a cultural touchstone. Folk music traditions include countless winter songs. English folk songs like the Sans Day Carol and Gaudette have been sung for centuries. Irish and Scottish winter songs often have a more melancholy tone, reflecting the harshness of winter in those climates. Scandinavian folk songs include hunting songs and songs about enduring winter's hardships. In the 20th century, popular music created new winter and Christmas songs that have become standards. Bing Crosby's White Christmas, Irving Berlin's composition from 1942, is the best-selling single of all time. Its nostalgic longing for an idealized white Christmas resonates across decades. Winter Wonderland, Let It Snow, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, The Christmas Song, and dozens of others form a canon of winter popular music. These songs are secular or only vaguely religious, focusing on winter imagery, romance, nostalgia, and the warmth of human connection during cold days. More recent additions to winter music include All I Want for Christmas Is You by Mariah Carey, which has become a modern standard, played endlessly each holiday season. Its upbeat energy and catchy melody make it impossible to ignore, for better or worse. The commercialization of winter music has created a peculiar phenomenon. The same songs played in retail stores from November through December, creating a sonic environment that's simultaneously festive and irritating. This overexposure can sap music of its emotional power, turning meaningful songs into background noise or even annoyance. Yet music remains powerful for marking the winter solstice and season. Attending a concert, singing with others, playing an instrument, or simply listening mindfully to music that resonates with winter's mood can be a meaningful way to observe the season. Poetry has also been an essential part of winter solstice traditions. We've mentioned the Persian tradition of reading Hafez's poetry during Yalda night. This practice turns poetry into divination, but it also acknowledges poetry's ability to speak to deep truths, to capture complex emotions, to provide insight and beauty. English poetry is rich with winter imagery. Shakespeare's plays include memorable winter passages. In Love's Labour's Lost, the song at the end contrasts spring and winter, when icicles hang by the wall, and Dick the shepherd blows his nail, and Tom bears logs into the hall, and milk comes frozen home in pail. The imagery is vivid and immediate. John Keats's The Eve of Street Agnes opens with intense winter cold. Street Agnes's eve, ah, bitter chill it was. The owl, for all his feathers, was a cold. The hare limped trembling through the frozen grass, and silent was the flock in woolly fold. You can feel the cold through the words. T.S. Eliot's Journey of the Magi describes winter travel. A cold coming we had of it, just the worst time of the year for a journey, and such a long journey, the ways deep and the weather sharp, the very dead of winter. The poem is technically about the Magi's journey to see the infant Jesus, but it speaks more broadly to winter's difficulties and the strange mixture of death and birth that the season represents. Modern poetry continues to engage with winter. Mary Oliver, the beloved American poet, wrote many winter poems, often focused on nature observation. Her poem, First Snow, describes the speaker waking to find the world transformed by snow, becoming one of the children of light. Billy Collins, another accessible contemporary American poet, has written winter poems that capture the season's quietness and introspection. His style is conversational and often humorous, making poetry feel approachable rather than intimidating. Visual arts have depicted winter and winter solstice themes for millennia. Medieval illuminated manuscripts include images of winter activities, hunting, feasting, gathering around fires. These images often appeared in books of hours, prayer books that included calendar pages showing the labours and leisure of each month. Peter Bruegel, the Elder's The Hunters in the Snow, painted in 1565, is one of the most famous winter paintings. It shows hunters returning to a village on a cold winter day, with people ice skating on a frozen pond below. The painting captures both winter's beauty and its challenges. The composition draws the eye down from the hunters in the foreground to the tiny figures skating in the distance, creating a sense of depth and atmosphere. The Impressionists painted winter scenes, fascinated by how snow and ice changed light and colour. Claude Monet painted numerous winter scenes, including the famous series of paintings showing haystacks in snow. His technique of capturing the changing quality of light worked beautifully for winter subjects, where the low angle of the sun creates long shadows and subtle colours. In the 20th century, artists continued to engage with winter themes. Andrew Wyeth's Christina's World, while painted in summer, has a winter feeling in its stark landscape and sense of isolation. Edward Hopper's paintings often convey winter's loneliness and introspection, even when not explicitly depicting winter. Contemporary artists work with winter themes in various media. Ice sculptures, popular at winter festivals, create temporary art that will inevitably melt, embodying impermanence. Land artists like Andy Goldsworthy create works specifically in winter settings, using ice, snow, and frozen materials. These works are photographed, as they won't last, and the photographs become the permanent record of ephemeral creations. The decorative arts of winter include ornaments, wreaths, and various crafts associated with winter holidays. These folk arts, often passed down through families, represent collective creativity and cultural continuity. Making ornaments with children, creating wreaths from evergreens, crafting decorations, these activities are both artistic and ritualistic. Theatre and performance have also been part of winter celebrations. Medieval mystery plays and mummers plays were performed during the Christmas season. These performances, often by amateur actors, told religious stories or enacted traditional tales. The mummers plays, in particular, have ancient roots, featuring stock characters like Street, George, the Turkish Knight, and Father Christmas, engaging in symbolic combat and resurrection. The tradition of the Christmas pantomime in Britain developed from these earlier forms. Pantomimes are theatrical productions, usually based on fairy tales, performed during the Christmas season. They feature specific conventions: men playing women's roles, the dame, women playing young male roles, the principal boy, audience participation, topical jokes, and elaborate spectacle. While they're silly and fun, they represent a continuous tradition of winter theatre stretching back centuries. Ballet performances of the Nutcracker serve a similar function, providing annual winter theatrical events that communities attend as tradition. The ritual of going to see the Nutcracker becomes as important as the performance itself. All these artistic expressions, music, poetry, visual art, theatre, provide ways to engage with winter and the solstice beyond mere survival or literal observation. Art transforms experience, finds beauty in darkness, creates meaning from the raw material of seasonal change. Art allows us to not just endure winter, but to celebrate it, to find in its depths something valuable and worth expressing. Part 16. The Winter Solstice, Across Time Continuity and Change. As we near the end of our journey through winter solstice celebrations, let's reflect on the themes of continuity and change that run through all these traditions. How have winter solstice practices persisted across millennia? How have they changed? What can this teach us? The most striking thing about winter solstice traditions is their continuity. For thousands of years, humans have marked this astronomical event. The specific forms have changed: the gods we honour, the foods we eat, the names we give the festival, but the underlying pattern persists. We gather together, we feast, we create light, we tell stories, we give gifts, we mark the turning of the year. These practices appear in ancient Rome, in medieval Europe, in traditional Persia, in indigenous America, in modern pagan communities, and in secular contemporary celebrations. The forms vary, but the essence remains. This continuity suggests something fundamental about human nature and our relationship to the natural world. Despite our technology, despite our ability to control and modify our environment, we remain creatures shaped by millions of years of evolution in a world of seasonal cycles. The winter solstice speaks to something deep in our being. At the same time, change is constant. The Roman Saturnalia became Christmas. pagan Yule merged with Christian celebration. Indigenous American ceremonies were suppressed and sometimes lost, sometimes preserved, sometimes revived in new forms. Each generation adapts the traditions it inherits. This is natural and healthy. Traditions that don't adapt die out. The question isn't whether traditions should change. They inevitably will, but how they change, what's preserved and what's transformed, what's gained and what's lost in the process. The Christianization of winter solstice celebrations provides a clear example. When Christianity spread through Europe, it encountered strong, beloved traditions around the winter solstice. Rather than simply eliminating these traditions, the Church adapted them, gave them new Christian meanings, and incorporated them into Christmas. This process preserved much of the external form of celebrations, feasting, gift-giving, evergreens, light, while changing their theological meaning. From one perspective, this was cultural imperialism, the dominant religion absorbing and transforming indigenous practices. From another perspective, it was pragmatic accommodation, allowing people to maintain meaningful traditions while adopting a new faith. The result is complex. Modern Christmas contains layers of meaning and practice from multiple sources. A Christmas tree is simultaneously a pagan symbol of life persisting through winter, a Christian symbol of eternal life, and a secular symbol of the holiday season. It means different things to different people, and that's okay. The modern revival of pagan winter solstice celebrations represents another kind of change. Modern pagans are not simply continuing unbroken traditions from ancient times. Most pagan traditions were disrupted, lost, or transformed centuries ago. What exists today is a reconstruction based on historical research, archaeological evidence, folklore, and modern creativity. Is reconstructed paganism authentic? That's the wrong question. All traditions are constructed at some point. What matters is whether they're meaningful to the people practicing them, whether they provide connection, community, and significance. By that standard, modern pagan Yule celebrations are as authentic as any other contemporary religious practice. The secularization of winter celebrations is another major change. Many people celebrate Christmas, light Hanukkah candles, or mark the solstice without religious belief. They participate for family tradition, cultural connection, enjoyment of the season's aesthetics, or simply because everyone else does. This secularization concerns some religious believers who see it as a loss of sacred meaning, but from another perspective, it's a continuation of the winter solstice pattern in new forms. Secular celebrations still involve gathering, feasting, gift-giving, creating light, all the elements that have marked the season for millennia. The theological overlay changes, but the human practices persist. Commercialization is perhaps the most controversial change in modern winter celebrations. The intense pressure to buy gifts, the elaborate advertising campaigns, the transformation of winter holidays into major retail events. All this troubles people who value the season's spiritual or family-focused aspects. Yet, gift-giving has always been part of winter solstice traditions. In Rome, during Saturnalia, in medieval Christmas, in Norse Yule gifts were exchanged. The scale and commercialization are new, but the practice itself is ancient. Perhaps the question isn't whether to give gifts, but how to do so in ways that feel meaningful rather than obligatory or excessive. The environmental impact of modern winter celebrations is another contemporary concern. Millions of evergreen trees cut down for Christmas, then discarded, vast amounts of wrapping paper, shipping boxes, and plastic packaging, extensive travel for family gatherings with associated carbon emissions, elaborate electric light display consuming significant electricity. These concerns are real and worth addressing. At the same time, they shouldn't obscure the positive aspects of winter celebrations, bringing families together, creating joy, maintaining traditions, marking meaningful transitions. The challenge is finding ways to celebrate that align with environmental values, perhaps using potted trees that can be planted later, giving experiences rather than things, using energy-efficient LED lights, or simplifying celebrations to focus on gathering and connection rather than consumption. The globalization of culture has created interesting cross-pollinations in winter traditions. Christmas has spread to countries with no Christian history. Japanese KFC on Christmas, a tradition that began with a marketing campaign in the 1970s, shows how holidays can take unexpected forms in new contexts. Korean adoptions of Christmas trees and decorations, even without significant Christian populations, demonstrate how appealing the winter celebration aesthetic has become. At the same time, there's increased awareness and interest in learning about winter traditions from different cultures. Persian Americans celebrate Yalda night. Chinese immigrants maintain Dongzhi traditions. This cultural diversity enriches everyone, providing multiple ways to mark the season and multiple perspectives on darkness, light, and renewal. The digital age has changed how winter traditions are practiced and shared. Families separated by distance can now video call during celebrations, sharing meals virtually. Social media allows people to share their celebrations, their decorations, their traditions, creating a global conversation about how we mark the season. Online communities have formed around specific winter traditions. Modern pagans connect globally, sharing rituals and practices. People interested in traditional crafts, making wreaths, baking traditional foods, creating decorations, find tutorials and communities online. This digital connectivity allows traditions to spread and evolve in new ways. Climate change is beginning to affect winter and winter celebrations in concrete ways. Warmer winters mean less snow in many regions, changing the winter landscape people have known. Traditional activities like ice skating on frozen ponds become less reliable. The timing of seasonal changes shifts, making traditional agricultural calendars less accurate. These changes create sadness and loss, but also adaptation. New traditions will emerge that reflect new realities. The deep human impulse to mark the winter solstice, to gather in darkness and create light, to feast and tell stories and give gifts, this will persist even as specific practices evolve. Looking at winter solstice traditions across thousands of years and across cultures worldwide, we see both remarkable continuity and constant change. We see human creativity and adaptability. We see how people take the raw material of astronomical events and seasonal changes and create meaning, beauty, and community. The winter solstice offers something fundamental, a moment of darkness before the return of light, a natural metaphor for countless human experiences of difficulty and renewal. This is why the solstice resonates across cultures and epochs. This is why traditions, in whatever form, persist. This is why, Even in our modern world of electric lights and climate control, we still feel drawn to mark this darkest point of the year. Conclusion: the winter solstice and our human journey. We've travelled far together through time and space, from Neolithic passage tombs to modern solstice gatherings, from Roman Saturnalia to Persian Yalda night, from indigenous American ceremonies to contemporary secular celebrations. We've explored food, light, music, art, science, personal reflection, and the interplay of continuity and change. What can we take from this long journey? What does the winter solstice mean, ultimately? Perhaps the most fundamental meaning is this: the winter solstice reminds us that we are part of nature, not separate from it. We are creatures of a planet that orbits a star. The tilt of our planet's axis creates seasons. The winter solstice is an astronomical fact, a moment in the Earth's orbit. But it's also a human experience, felt in our bodies and psyches, marked in our cultures and traditions. In our modern world, we can easily forget our connection to natural cycles. Electric lights extend the day. Climate control moderates temperature. Global supply chains provide the same foods year-round. We can, if we choose, largely ignore the seasons. But something is lost when we do this. We lose the rhythm, the connection, the sense of being part of something larger than ourselves. The winter solstice calls us back to this connection. It says, pay attention to the darkness, notice the cold, feel the year turning, mark this moment. Whether we mark it religiously or secularly, alone or in community, with ancient rituals or modern innovations, the act of marking it matters. The solstice also teaches us about cycles and impermanence. Darkness gives way to light. Light will eventually give way to darkness again. Winter becomes spring, becomes summer, becomes autumn, becomes winter. Nothing lasts forever, but nothing is lost forever either. Everything returns in its season. This cyclical understanding contrasts with the linear narrative that dominates much modern thinking. We're taught to think in terms of progress, of moving forward, of constant growth. But nature moves in circles. The same seasons return. The same astronomical events recur. There's wisdom in this circular thinking, in accepting return and repetition as natural and valuable, rather than seeing them as failure or stagnation. The winter solstice teaches us about darkness. In a culture that often treats darkness as something to be eliminated or feared, the solstice says, darkness has value. It's necessary. It's where rest happens, where restoration occurs, where seeds germinate and new life begins. Embracing darkness doesn't mean wallowing in depression or giving up. It means accepting darkness as a natural part of the cycle, something to be experienced and honoured, not just endured until light returns. The traditions of creating light during the darkest time, lighting candles, building fires, hanging lights, show us how to work with darkness rather than simply surrendering to it. We don't have to passive wait for the sun's return. We can create our own light. This is a powerful metaphor for life. When things are dark, we can be sources of light for ourselves and others. The emphasis on gathering together during the winter solstice speaks to our fundamental social nature. Humans are not solitary creatures. We evolved in groups, and we need community for our well-being. The winter season, with its challenges and darkness, intensifies this need. coming together to feast, to celebrate, to share light and warmth. These aren't frivolous activities, but essential practices for human flourishing. The practice of giving gifts during the winter season reflects our capacity for generosity and our recognition of mutual dependence. In traditional societies, sharing resources during winter could be a matter of survival. Those with more helped those with less. In modern times, gift-giving has become more symbolic, but the underlying principle remains. We care for each other, we want to bring joy to others, we express love and connection through material generosity. The foods of winter solstice celebrations, often rich and indulgent, remind us that life should include pleasure and abundance, not just survival. Feasting is more than just eating, it's celebrating, it's affirming life in the midst of winter's scarcity, it's choosing joy and community. The shared meal creates bonds and memories that nourish us long after the food is digested. The stories, songs, and artistic expressions associated with winter solstice provide meaning and beauty. They transform the raw fact of astronomical and meteorological winter into something rich with significance. Through art, we make sense of our experience. We connect with those who came before us and those who will come after. We create culture, which is one of humanity's defining characteristics. The scientific understanding of the solstice, far from diminishing its meaning, deepens it. Knowing the mechanics of Earth's orbit and axial tilt doesn't make the solstice less significant. If anything, understanding the vast scales of space and time involved our small planet, orbiting a medium-sized star in a galaxy of hundreds of billions of stars, makes the solstice more profound. We are part of this cosmic dance, this immense universe, yet our local experience of day and night, light and darkness, warmth and cold, still matters deeply. As we approach the winter solstice each year, we have choices to make. Will we notice it? Will we mark it in some way? Will we allow it to be meaningful? Or will we let it pass unremarked in the busyness of modern life? There's no right answer. Each person must find their own relationship with the season and its turning points. But perhaps there's value in pausing, in taking a moment on or around the winter solstice to acknowledge what's happening astronomically, seasonally, personally. Perhaps there's value in lighting a candle and sitting with its light in the darkness. Perhaps there's value in reaching out to loved ones, sharing a meal, giving a gift. Perhaps there's value in reading poetry or listening to music that resonates with winter's mood. Perhaps there's value in simply stepping outside, feeling the cold, looking at the sky, and thinking about the Earth's journey around the sun. The winter solstice is both entirely ordinary and completely extraordinary. It happens every year, as predictable as sunrise. Yet, it's also the longest night, the turning point, the moment when everything changes direction. It's a cosmic event and an intimate experience. It's ancient history and present moment. It's collective tradition and personal meaning. In marking the winter solstice, we join hands with humans stretching back thousands of years. We stand with the Neolithic builders of Newgrange, watching light penetrate darkness. We stand with Romans exchanging gifts during Saturnalia. We stand with Persians reading Hafez through Yalda night. We stand with Hopi people performing Soyal. We stand with Vikings burning Yule logs. We stand with all who have watched the sun reach its lowest point and trusted in its return. This is the gift of the winter solstice: connection. Connection to nature, to the cosmos, to human history, to community, to tradition, to ourselves. In an often fragmented, disconnected modern world, this connection has profound value. The solstice offers it freely, requiring only that we notice, that we pause, that we mark this moment of darkness and light. So as the winter solstice approaches, as the longest night arrives, may you find your own way to mark it. May you create or find light in the darkness. May you gather with those you love or find peace in solitude. May you feast and celebrate or rest and restore. May you honor the darkness as necessary and meaningful. May you trust in the light's return. May you feel yourself part of the great turning of the year, the eternal cycle of seasons, the vast dance of planet and star. The sun has reached its lowest point. The longest night is here. And now, slowly but surely, inevitably and eternally, the light begins to return. The days will lengthen. Spring will come. But for now, for this moment, we are here in the darkness, and it is enough. It is everything. It is the winter solstice, and it is ours to witness, to honor, to celebrate. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the winter solstice celebrations of the world. I hope these stories and traditions have given you new perspectives on this ancient observance. I hope they've helped you understand the many ways humans have marked this darkest point of the year, and I hope, perhaps, they've inspired you to create your own meaningful relationship with the winter solstice. May your winter be filled with light, warmth, connection, and the deep rest that this season offers. May you find beauty in the darkness and hope in the returning sun. And may you sleep well with these ancient stories and traditions as gentle companions in your dreams. This has been Sleepless History. Until next time, rest well.